Chapter 45. What about the guy who kidnapped 3rd Miss Yi? Catch him and give him an arm and a leg as a wedding gift to Mo Jingli. Although the city gate had long been closed, Yi Li still returned to the minister's mansion before dawn with some effort. As soon as she entered her room, Qing Shuang and Qing Yu greeted her. The unconcealable anxiety on their faces also turned into relief. Qing Yu calmly served Yi Li a cup of tea. It was as if the usually elegant and dignified Yi Li was not bothered by the fact that she was able to jump in through the window in front of her. Qing Shuang patted her chest and exhaled, "Miss, you're finally back." Qing Shuang was worried to death. Yi Li smiled and said, "What's there to worry about when someone is following me?" "Right, Qing Luan." A figure fell lightly outside the window. It was Qing Luan who came from the Su family with Qing Yu. Qing Luan pursed her lips and smiled, "Miss, you're so powerful." Qing Luan followed you all the way and no one noticed. Who knew that I couldn't hide from you? Yi Li smiled and said, "In fact, I didn't notice you, but I seemed to smell a faint, special and familiar fragrance along the way. The person who caught me, the fragrance on his body was not light, so he didn't smell it." Qing Luan lowered her head in frustration and secretly decided that she would never use any incense in the future. In fact, the incense she used was very light. Ordinary people would not notice it at all. But Yi Li's senses were indeed much more sensitive than ordinary people. "Did anything interesting happen in the woods after I left?" Yi Li sat down and asked while drinking the freshly brewed tea. Qing Luan also learned from Yi Li's action and came in through the window. She smiled and said, "That person was thrown into a pool in the depths of the woods." "Prince Ding. Mrs. Wise." Qing Luan smiled in a good mood. Thinking of the embarrassing appearance of someone who was tied to a tree and thrown into the pool, Qing Luan felt that tonight's worry was not in vain. She believed that eldest young master would also like this news very much. This servant also saw someone beside Prince Ding. They seemed to have a very good relationship. Yi Li raised her eyebrows and looked at Qing Luan. Qing Luan did not keep her in suspense and said, "It's the famous young master Feng San in the capital." Yi Li hadn't thought about the relationship between Feng Xiao and Mo Xiaoyao. This also explained why Feng Xiao had been so curious about her during the 100 Flower Festival. So His Highness Prince Ding also went to save Miss? Young Miss didn't see Prince Ding. Qing Shuang blinked her eyes and asked curiously. Yi Li shook her head. She knew that there were other people in the forest at that time. She could vaguely guess who it was, but she had no intention of meeting them, so she ignored them. Since Mo Xiaoyao did not order anyone to stop Qing Luan, he must have understood her intentions. There was no need to waste words when interacting with smart people. "Very good." She casually threw a jade pendant to Qing Luan and said, "Give it to eldest cousin. Ask him to see if he can find out who the owner of this jade pendant is." Qing Luan caught it in her hand and said with a gloating smile, "Then this servant has to be quick." Prince Ding reserved one of his hands and one of his legs for Li Wang as a congratulatory gift. If he didn't run fast, I'm afraid he would be in trouble tonight. His qinggong is not bad. If there is time, find a way to keep him. Maybe he can help us with something. If it was too late, then there was no other way. She did not think that a person who would enter the Fu in the middle of the night to kidnap an innocent woman would be a kind person. However, that person clearly knew that she was awake, but still took her to Mo Jingli. Moreover, he did not have any intention of reminding Mo Jingli. It could be seen that he was a very interesting person. Of course, it was more likely that Mo Jingli had unintentionally offended this person. Qing Yu stood at the side and looked at this and that. She asked with a strange expression, "Can tomorrow's wedding still be held as scheduled?" Qing Luan waved her hand indifferently and said, "It should be fine. I heard Feng Xiao instructing Prince Ding's guards to send Prince Li's men to rescue his master when the sun is about to rise." Qing Yu nodded her head and said, "Since that's the case, young miss should quickly rest while it's still early. If you don't look well tomorrow, people will criticize you." Qing Shuang also nodded in agreement. She did not want others to take the opportunity to ruin Mrs. reputation. Did no one consider that a wedding was also very tiring? If the groom fainted or something during the wedding tomorrow? Yili thought irresponsibly and let a few maids change her clothes and push her to bed to sleep. Shangshu Fu early in the morning, there were people coming and going. Yili brought Yi Shan and Yi Lin to sit in old Madame Ye's Rongla hall to accompany her. The courtyard where Ying lived was already busy before dawn. Wang Shi disliked Yi Lin and Yi Shan for being a hindrance and was even more afraid that Yi Li would take the opportunity to do something. She did not want them to accompany her. Instead, she brought two nieces from her maternal family to accompany Ying. Yi Li was naturally happy and relaxed. She came to greet old Madame early in the morning and stayed here to accompany old Madame. Anyway, she could not stay in Qing Yi Xian for the whole day. That would only be gossiped about. Old Madame Ye's face was full of joy. Even her face was much more amiable when facing everyone. Yi Lin and Yi Shan naturally would not let go of this opportunity. They joked and flattered in front of old Madame Yi. Yi Li drank tea calmly while silently wondering if she should join in the fun and watch a play in the next few days. When it was close to noon, old Madame Ye's white eyebrows gradually frowned. She ordered the people around her, "Go out and see if the wedding party has arrived." After a while, the people who were sent out hurriedly came back. They wiped their sweat and reported, "Old Madame, the wedding party has not arrived yet." Old Madame Ye's smiling face suddenly darkened. It was almost noon. It was inauspicious to come in the afternoon to escort the bride. Is Prince Li really going to abandon fourth sister again? The youngest, Yi Shan, suddenly asked. Shan, Yi Shan's birth mother was so scared that her face turned pale. How dare you? Today is fourth sister's big day. What nonsense are you talking about? Go out. Yi Li said sternly. She glanced at Yi Shan before old Madame Yi got angry. Yi Shan moved her lips and wanted to say something. Yi Lin quickly pulled her and her birth mother and dragged Yi Shan out. Shan is young and speaks without thinking. It's Li's fault for not teaching her properly. Grandmother, please don't be angry. Yi Li looked at old Madame Yi and said softly. Third miss is right. Sixth miss is a little girl. It's inevitable that she has some thoughts. Fortunately, everyone here is our family. Old Madam, please don't be angry because today is fourth Miss's big day. Because Yi Shan was pregnant, concubine Zhao was given a seat as an exception. At this time, she quickly stood up and pleaded with old Madame Yi. Old Madame Yi was not in the mood to argue with Yi Shan. She waved her hand and said, "Go and ask master to come here. Also, send someone to check." Knowing that old Madame Yi was not in a good mood, the servant did not dare to say anything and hurriedly left. Chapter 46. The atmosphere in Rongla Hall was a bit heavy. Yi Li was still sitting quietly and drinking tea. Concubine Zhao was sitting sideways and peeking at Yi Li from time to time. But she found that there was no emotion on this young lady's face. It was as if nothing had happened. For a moment, concubine Zhao was not sure if today's matter had anything to do with the third young lady. Seemingly aware of concubine Zhao's gaze, Yi Li raised her head and glanced at her. The completely unreadable gaze made concubine Zhao's heart go cold. She nodded slightly to Yi Li, then leaned her head against the back of the chair and closed her eyes to rest. Seeing that noon had passed, the messenger who had been waiting outside the gate had not returned. It seemed that Prince Li's wedding was destined to be late. Minister Yi came in with Wang Shi in a hurry. Old Madame Yi stared at her son and daughter-in-law and said sternly, "What happened? Did you find out?" Minister Ye's face was also clouded. He said in a deep voice, "Mother, calm down. The people who were sent to find out have returned. Prince Li's mansion has already set off." Already set off? Old Madame Yi was so angry that she laughed. She said a few good words and pointed at Minister Yi, "Which family's daughter is getting married and the husband's family can forget the auspicious time of the wedding?" After a few days, our Yi family will be the joke of the whole capital. What does Prince Li's mansion mean? The daughter-in-law has not married into the family and they are already slapping our Yi family's face. Minister Yi frowned and said, perhaps there really is something that delayed them? Old Madam Yi snorted and said, what is more important than the wedding? Minister Yi was suddenly speechless. Old Madam Yi could only sigh. Today, it was already a joke that Prince Li's mansion was late. But no matter how angry they were, they still had to send Yi Ying out. Otherwise, Yi Ying's reputation would really be ruined. She glared at Wang Shi angrily and said, what are you waiting for? See if Ying is ready. When the wedding's people come, send Ying out immediately. Wang Shi did not care about her grievances and anger at this time. She quickly said, it has already been ready. We are just waiting to say goodbye. Old Madam can go out. Old Madam Yi snorted and did not speak. When the servants finally came to report that the wedding's procession was about to arrive, it was already the end of the night. Yi Ying was supported by her maidservants and nannies to Rongla Hall to bid farewell to old Madam Yi. Although her face was painted with exquisite makeup, Yi Li, who was sitting close to her, could see that her face was a little pale and her eyes were a little red and swollen. It was obvious that Yi Ying had cried before, too. Yi Mo Jingli was wearing a red four-clawed golden dragon wedding robe. His already handsome face was even more majestic and dignified. However, Yi Li could clearly see the stiffness in his indifferent expression that was different from usual. Then she looked at the unnatural pale face and the shadows in his eyes. Yi Li was forced to sit in silence for the whole morning. Her mood miraculously improved a lot. She dared to bet with her cousin's title of Zhuangyuan that Mo Jingli's face was definitely made up. Mo Jingli almost saw Yi Li, who was wearing a lavender dress beside Minister Yi at first sight. A fire flashed in his eyes. His eyes were so enthusiastic that he even ignored his bride. Minister Yi coughed a little unhappily. Mo Jingli reluctantly moved his eyes and saluted Minister Yi, I came late. Please forgive me, father-in-law. If he didn't mention it, it would be fine. But when he mentioned it, Minister Yi was full of anger. His tone was a little light, I don't dare. I only hope that Prince will treat Ying well in the future. Mo Jingli knew that he was in the wrong. He hurriedly said yes and promised to treat Yi Ying well. When he looked up, he happened to see Yi Li's face with a faint smile. Thinking of his experience last night, Mo Jingli couldn't wait to rush over and tear Yi Li apart. From childhood to adulthood, he was the one who tortured others. Except for the former Mo Xiaoyao, this was the first time he was tortured so badly. Before dawn, he woke up from his sleep and found that he was tied up and left in the pool. But no matter how he screamed, the guards he brought to the forest came to find him after dawn. Although it was close to May, the pool was cold all year round. When he was pulled out, he was frozen and couldn't move. It was not easy to get to the courtyard outside the city. He drank ginger soup and medicine to drive the cold. After he recovered, he hurried back to the city. He endured the discomfort all over his body to pick up the bride, but he still missed the auspicious hour. Compared with himself, Yi Li, who was looking at him with a calm smile at this time, was so good that it made him gnash his teeth. I will never let you go. Mo Jingli's eyes were gloomy and cruel. Yi Li faintly curled her lips. She had no hope for Mo Jingli's IQ. She simply gave him a look back, I'll be waiting for you. Yi Li didn't know that the brief exchange of glances between her and Mo Jingli at this time became completely different in the eyes of people with ulterior motives. Wang Shi, who was standing beside Yi Ying, saw the interaction between the two in her eyes. A trace of ruthlessness flashed through her half-closed eyes. After sending Yi Ying out, what should be done on the surface had been done. Yi Li ignored the complicated and unpredictable eyes of the people and went back to Qing Yixian in a good mood. As soon as she stepped into the study, Yi Li paused for a moment. Then she turned back and ordered, Qing Luan, stay here to serve. Everyone else go to rest. Although Qing Shuang and others were a little puzzled, they also knew that Yi Li had never liked to follow others. They just thought that she had something to tell Qing Luan alone, so they bowed and left. Qing Luan stood quietly by the door and waited for Mrs. Order. Yili walked to the window and stood still. She looked around the study and finally fell on the gauze curtain that separated the inside and outside of the study. She asked softly, "Still not coming out?" There was no movement in the study. Qing Luan already had 2 cold short thorns in her hands. Her usually docile and harmless eyes also had a trace of fierce murderous intent. After waiting for a moment, there was still no movement. Yili frowned with some displeasure. She threw something the size of a pigeon egg in her hand in the direction of the gauze curtain. A strong white smoke rose. For a moment, a figure in the white smoke rushed towards Yili's direction. But when he was about to reach the window, he suddenly fell to the ground. The cold short thorns on his back had been pressed against his back. But there was no figure of Yili in front of him. He didn't know when Yili had stood a few feet away from him. I really didn't expect Third Miss Yi to be so skillful. I admit defeat. The man smiled bitterly. He helplessly relaxed his soft body and fell to the ground. Yili looked as usual. "I'm still far worse than you. It's just that after last night's adventure, I think it's necessary to make some preparations." The man raised his eyebrows. It seemed that he didn't care that someone was still pressing against his back. He looked at Yili with a smile and said, "You know it was me last night? Is it, because of what happened last night that you can't forget me?" Even Yili had to admit that the man in front of her was very handsome. Unlike Feng Zhiao's unruly appearance, there was more evil and deliberate ambiguity between his eyebrows. If it was an ordinary woman, she would inevitably be angry or blushed with shame and cover her face. Unfortunately, Yili was not in this ordinary category. "I thought what you should pay attention to now is not me, but the thing behind you. Believe me, as long as I put 30% more strength in that place, although your life will not be in danger, I guarantee that you can spend the rest of your life lying in bed." As if to confirm Yili's words, the sharp short thorns on his back were pushed forward. The sharp pains suddenly spread from his back to his whole body. The man's face changed slightly. He forced a smile and said, "Third Miss Yi is not going to kill me, right?" Chapter 47. Yili shook her head, and a rare bright smile appeared on her beautiful face. But the man on the ground couldn't help but feel a chill down his spine. Killing people to silence them is not something a lady of a noble family should do. "So, I plan to give you away. I heard that many people are looking for you. Tell me, should I give you to Prince Ding or to Prince Li?" The man looked at Yili with a bitter face and begged for mercy. If he fell into Prince Ding's hands, he would definitely lose an arm or a leg. If he fell into Prince Li's hands, Prince Li would definitely want his life just because a certain someone was standing here and threatening him. "Third Miss, I'm only doing this because I'm paid. Moreover, I've helped you before. Can't you be magnanimous and spare my life?" Yili turned around and found a comfortable chair to sit in. She smiled and asked, "Are you helping me? Isn't it because Mo Jingli offended you and you want to teach him a lesson?" Unable to beg for mercy, the man could only put away the smile on his face and said seriously, "How about I owe Third Miss a favor?" Yili supported her chin and smiled lazily. "This. Even if you dare to owe young Master Feng Yu a favor from the Wind and Moon brothel, I dare not ask you to return it." The Wind and Moon brothel was the world's #1 brothel. Young Master Feng Yu, Han Mingyue, was the world's famous flower thief. Being associated with him was equivalent to having one's reputation destroyed. This time, the man's expression changed completely. He stared at Yili and said, "My jade pendant is in your hands?" In this world, only a handful of people knew that young Master Feng Yu and the owner of the Wind and Moon brothel were the same person. "I didn't know that Third Miss Yi of the minister's estate, the future princess consort of Ding, had such tricks up her sleeves." To be able to secretly take the jade pendant from him was not an easy thing to do. Han Mingyue even suspected that he didn't have a good time coming to the capital this time. Originally, he had only caught a little girl for Prince Li to play with on a whim. He didn't expect that this seemingly harmless lady was a poisonous flower. He had originally wanted to toy with the arrogant Princely, but in the end, he had gotten himself involved as well. Less than an hour after leaving the forest that day, he discovered that he was being followed. 2 hours later, the original group of people had split into 2 groups. By daybreak, even Mo Jingli's men had joined in. Yi Li smiled but didn't say anything. She patiently looked at the handsome man in front of her. Finally, Han Mingyue raised her hand helplessly and admitted defeat. She said, "Third young mistress Yi, what do I have to do for you to let me go? If necessary, lend me the intelligence network of the Wind and Moon Pavilion." Yi Li proposed her condition. Han Mingyue's eyes flashed. This one does not understand what Miss Yi means. Brothels and taverns are the biggest gathering and distribution centers for information. I guess, the Tianyi Pavilion has a close relationship with you. Is that right? The Tianyi Pavilion was the most mysterious intelligence organization in Dechu State. They made a living by selling information. However, because they were secretive, many people who wanted to find them returned empty-handed. Young Master Han, you can get up. If I'm not wrong, the effects of the drug have already worn off. Yi Li looked at the person who was still lying on the ground powerlessly and reminded him indifferently. Han Mingyue didn't feel embarrassed at being exposed. She stood up calmly and patted the non-existent dust off her body. She cupped her hands and said to Yi Li, "Third young mistress Yi is so sharp that this one is amazed." It was indeed surprising that a lady of the boudoir could deduce the relationship between the Wind and Moon Pavilion and the Tianyi Pavilion. I'll give the jade pendant to third young mistress. If third young mistress needs anything, just send someone to find me with the jade pendant. I believe that with third young mistress's ability, you should know where to find people. Yi Li didn't refuse. She nodded and said, "Thank you very much. I'll ask Prince Ding to exchange a gift for His Highness Prince Li." Han Mingyue smiled bitterly and looked at Yi Li. "Aren't you afraid that I'll go back on my word?" Yi Li smiled sweetly. "Unless you want the whole world to know the relationship between young Master Fengyu, the Wind and Moon Pavilion and the Tianyi Pavilion. I won't see you out. Goodbye." Qing Luan put away her short thorns and watched Han Mingyue leave through the window. She frowned and asked in confusion, "Young mistress, are you letting him go just like that?" Yi Li stood up and stood by the window. She stared at the place where Han Mingyue's figure disappeared. "Do you really think he's the owner of the Wind and Moon Pavilion? Isn't he?" Yi Li played with the jade pendant in her hand. "I don't think so. However, he must have a close relationship with the real Han Mingyue. It's not worth angering Han Mingyue for him. Third young mistress Yi is wise." A teasing voice with a lazy smile came from outside. Yi Li raised her head and looked at Feng Xiao, who was leaning under the eaves. She smiled and said, "Young Master Feng, it's not the behavior of a gentleman to come uninvited." Feng Xiao waved his folding fan naturally and gracefully. It was as if he wasn't standing outside a lady's boudoir, but at a grand event where thousands of people were watching. Third young mistress's methods and knowledge really make me concede defeat. It's not easy to take advantage of Han Mingyue. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "I never take advantage of others. I believe that Pavilion Master Han will think so too." However, young Master Feng used Qinggong, which allows him to enter and leave the minister's residence as if no one was there, is almost comparable to young Master Feng Yu. The veins on Feng Xiao's forehead couldn't help but twitch. He tried his best to show his elegance. His Highness Prince Ding invites third young mistress Yi to attend Prince Li's wedding. Yi Li raised her brows. Prince Ding will attend such an event? She remembered that ever since Mo Xiaoyao's accident, he had never appeared in public. Feng Xiao smiled and said, "That was then and this is now. Originally, there was no such plan. Apparently, it was only decided this morning. I believe that third young mistress will not be disappointed." Yi Li blinked and immediately understood the meaning behind Feng Xiao's words. She nodded and smiled. "Thank you, young Master Feng Yu, for sending the message. Feng Yu will be waiting for you at that time." Yi Li, who wasn't part of the wedding procession, originally didn't need to attend her younger sister's wedding. But since Mo Xiaoyao had sent Feng Yu to send the message, Yi Li believed that there would be a good show to watch. And she felt that there was a need to personally communicate with her fiancé about Han Mingyue. Good communication was good for mutual trust. After changing into a suitable set of clothes, Yi Li sent someone to report to Old Furen. Before she left the door, a servant came in to report that Prince Ding had come to pick up third young mistress. Old Furen knew that it wasn't convenient for Mo Xiaoyao and didn't dare delay. She hurriedly let Yi Li go. Coming out of the gates of the Yi Fu, she saw the carriage with the symbol of the Ding King's Fu. The young guard called Ah Jin saw Yi Li come out and immediately came forward. Ah Jin greets Wang Fei. Yi Li was a bit embarrassed. Even though this was only the second time they had met, but Yi Li could see that this youth called Ah Jin wasn't very clever. Nodding and saying thank you, Yi Li got off the carriage. Mo Xiaoyao was leaning against the carriage, his head lowered as he read a book in his hand. Seeing Yi Li come up, he put the book to one side and said with a faint smile, "Sit, were you frightened last night?" Yi Li walked in front of him and sat down. She smiled and replied, "I was fine, I had to trouble you to go over." Mo Xiaoyao seemed to have thought of something interesting and the faint smile in his eyes became more real. "It was fortunate that I went over. Otherwise, I wouldn't have known that Wang Fei had such methods." Yi Li shrugged her shoulders indifferently. She didn't mind Mo Xiaoyao seeing some of her true colors. After all, they would be husband and wife in the future and there were many things that couldn't be hidden from him. "It's just a small trick, I've embarrassed myself in front of your highness." Chapter 48. Mo Xiaoyao frowned slightly. "Do we have to keep calling him prince and princess consort?" Yi Li looked up at him in confusion. "Then what should we call him? Lord? Husband? Husband? Husband?" Before she could finish, Yi Li shivered. She didn't feel that there was anything wrong with other people calling him, but why did it sound so awkward when it came out of her mouth? Compared to these names, Yi Li would rather follow the crowd and call him prince and princess consort. Mo Xiaoyao smiled. "You can call me by my name." Mo Xiaoyao. Xiaoyao. Mo Xiaoyao corrected, "Can I call you Li?" Yi Li nodded. She was glad that he didn't call her Li. To be honest, other than the elders, it was hard for her to get used to being called that intimately. "Do you mind if I release that person from yesterday?" Yi Li looked at Mo Xiaoyao seriously. Mo Xiaoyao shook his head. His expression was relaxed as he smiled. "It's fine. Since you don't mind, then forget it. After all, Han Mingyue isn't someone you can offend." Yi Li raised an eyebrow. "You don't seem to be surprised at his relationship with Han Mingyue?" "When I was young, I had a bit of friendship with Han Mingyue." Yi Li understood. For Mo Xiaoyao to admit that he had a bit of friendship with her, it definitely wasn't a normal friendship. "Prince, we've arrived at the Li Palace." As the two of them chatted idly, they had already arrived outside the Li Palace. The two of them weren't talkative people, but Yi Li found that talking to Mo Xiaoyao was never boring. Yi Li was about to get out of the carriage when Mo Xiaoyao suddenly called out. Yi Li turned around and looked at him in confusion. Mo Xiaoyao looked at her quietly. "Are you really ready? Do I need to prepare anything?" Yi Li raised her eyebrows. For a moment, she couldn't remember if she had really forgotten anything. Mo Xiaoyao was taken aback. Then, a faint smile appeared on his face as he said softly, "It's nothing. You may leave." Since Prince Ding had personally congratulated her, the Li Palace naturally could not neglect it. Especially now that Prince Ding had not appeared in the capital for nearly 8 years, personally attending Prince Li's wedding could be said to be giving Prince Li enough face. And according to the seniority of the imperial family, Prince Ding, who was about the same age as King Li, was of the same generation as King Li. Thus, not only King Li himself, even the imperial relatives who had come to attend the wedding also came out to welcome him. The Ding King's residence did not have any ostentation and under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the first person to alight from the horse carriage was a young lady dressed in purple. Her lilac-colored dress was embroidered with elegant lotus flowers. Her hair was loosely tied up and the jeweled butterflies in her hair were dazzling. Just by slightly tilting her face, everyone could see a beautiful face with light makeup. Very quickly, two guards lifted up the curtain of the horse carriage and gently lifted Emo Xiaoyao and the wheelchair that he was sitting on out of the horse carriage. Emo Xiaoyao indifferently swept his gaze over the stunned people at the entrance of the Li Palace. He turned his head to look at Yi Li, who was standing by the side, and extended his hand towards her. Yi Li raised her hand and allowed Emo Xiaoyao to hold her hand. Behind her, Jin had already pushed the wheelchair towards the entrance of the Li Palace. Cough. Greetings to Prince Dinggua. Finally, someone reacted. Glancing at the unresponsive King Li, who was still staring at the approaching Prince Ding, the person who regained his senses gave a light cough as a reminder to the host to welcome the guest. Greetings to Prince Dinggua. Today is King Li's wedding, no need to be so courteous, Emo Xiaoyao said warmly and then looked at Emo Jingli with a smile. Jingli, congratulations. Many thanks. Emo Jingli glared viciously at Yi Li, who was standing next to Emo Xiaoyao, and said through gritted teeth. Emo Xiaoyao raised an eyebrow. You're not inviting us in? Emo Jingli could only move to the side and let the two in. But he was not willing to say another word. Emo Xiaoyao clearly understood Emo Jingli's temper. He raised his head and smiled at Yi Li. Let's go in. Yi Li pursed her lips and smiled, nodding without a word. She followed Emo Xiaoyao through the gates of the Li Palace. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Feng Zhiao standing in an inconspicuous corner, looking at the three people at the door with a smile that was especially annoying. Entering the Li Palace, the virtuous consort was personally waiting in the main hall to welcome them. Seeing Emo Xiaoyao and Yi Li walk in side by side, her eyes flashed. She quickly stood and walked forward with a smile. Li Er's wedding, it's rare that Xiaoyao is willing to personally come. It's really an honor for the Li Palace. It seems that Xiaoyao and the future Wang Fei have a very good relationship. When you get married, I will naturally send a generous gift. Emo Xiaoyao nodded slightly, the half of his face showing respect and gentleness. I've caused Consort Dowager to worry. At that time, Xiaoyao will definitely wait for Consort Dowager and Emo Xiaoyao's arrival. Yi Li quietly stood next to Emo Xiaoyao and did not interrupt. She didn't know why, but ever since she saw the virtuous Consort Dowager last time, this seemingly graceful and amiable dowager always made her wary. There are no outsiders here, third Miss Yi, please take a seat. The virtuous Consort Dowager did not forget to call out to Yi Li as she chatted with Emo Xiaoyao. Yi Li softly thanked her and sat down next to Emo Xiaoyao. Unfortunately, she just happened to sit across from Emo Jingli. She did not need to raise her head to feel that Emo Jingli was fiercely glaring at her. Being stared at like this in this kind of situation made Yi Li somewhat angry. Shouldn't the people who were about to get married be so busy that they were dizzy? Why was this Emo Jingli so idle as to sit here and listen to people bicker? Oh, what's wrong with Jingli? Why does he keep staring at third Miss Yi? An ear-piercing female voice sounded in the hall. Yi Li frowned and raised her head to look at that person. There were only 7 or 8 people in the hall, but those who were personally accompanied by the virtuous Consort Dowager were naturally not ordinary guests. At least, they were not people that Yi Li, a girl from the minister's manor, could afford to offend. The person who spoke was also looking at Yi Li with a picky expression. Her phoenix pattern and peony brocade robe showed that this person's status was not ordinary. When she spoke, the people who were originally focused on Emo Xiaoyao, who had not been seen for a long time, immediately looked at Yi Li. That person was not prepared to leave the matter at that. Her shrewd phoenix eyes revealed a cold light as she laughed softly and said in a sharp voice, speaking of which, I almost forgot. Isn't third Miss Yi Jing Li's ex-fiancée? Presumably, Jing Li is just curious about the new number 1 talented woman in the capital. Isn't everyone here curious as well? Emo Xiaoyao's voice faintly sounded in the hall. His voice seemed to be gentle without any anger, but it was clear that he was protecting his fiancée. Yili lowered her head and silently looked at her hand being held by a slightly cold hand. Prince Ding is right. Third Miss Yi is the one who really shocked the world with a single brilliant feat. Thinking back, Madame Yi was also a quiet and uncompetitive person, but her literary talent is still fresh in our memories. The white-haired old madam sitting at the front laughed loudly and looked at Yili with a kind gaze. Yili smiled faintly. Old madam is too kind. Yili can't compare to my late mother's grace. I only hope that I can inherit 1 or 2 parts of it. The old madam nodded in praise and said, "You are a humble and good child." Chapter 49. This is the old madam of Hua State. Mo Xiaoyao introduced her to Yili in a soft voice. Only then did Yili realize that this woman was actually Tian Xiang's grandmother. Then Mo Xiaoyao introduced Yili to each of the people present. Unsurprisingly, they were all relatives of high officials or members of the royal family. The woman who spoke first was the emperor and Prince Li's aunt, Princess Zhaoran. She was also Princess Ronghua's biological mother. Thinking of Princess Ronghua's arrogant appearance at the 100-Flower Festival, Yili could only sigh. They were indeed mother and daughter. But she didn't know why Princess Zhaoran was so obviously hostile to her. It couldn't be because of Princess Ronghua, right? When Mo Xiaoyao introduced Yili, the people present secretly re-evaluated the third young miss of the Yi family who was rejected by Prince Li and then married to Prince Ding. Prince Ding personally introduced her to the most powerful nobles of the Dechu state, which was enough to show how much importance he attached to her. Therefore, except for Mo Jingli, whose face was even uglier, the atmosphere in the hall was as harmonious and friendly as always. Yi Li. In the garden of Prince Li's mansion, Hua Tianxiang pulled Yi Li and walked while talking. Suddenly, a tall figure appeared in front of them and blocked their way. "Your Highness Prince Li, what's the matter?" Hua Tianxiang stood in front of Yi Li and raised her beautiful face to ask. Since the incident at Chu Xiang Pavilion, Hua Tianxiang's favorable impression of Prince Li had plummeted and was now close to negative value. Seeing Mo Jingli appear in front of them with an unfriendly expression, she only thought that he wanted to make trouble for Yi Li. Mo Jingli frowned unhappily. "I am not looking for you," Hua Tianxiang said without any trace of politeness. "Shouldn't Prince be greeting guests now?" Most of the women in this garden were from various manners, so it would be inconvenient for the prince to enter and leave. Even if Prince doesn't care about his own reputation, he should at least care about others. "I have something to say to Yi Li." "Move aside," Mo Jingli said impatiently. "Just say what you want to say." "Li can hear you," Hua Tianxiang said. Mo Jingli narrowed his eyes dangerously. "I said move." Hua Tianxiang still wanted to say something, but Yi Li pulled her back. "Tianxiang, go and see if Murong and the others have arrived." "I'll be right there." "But..." Hua Tianxiang glanced at Mo Jingli worriedly. Yi Li said with a smile, "Don't worry, Xiaoyao will come to find me after he's done talking with old Madame Hua." Hearing this, Hua Tianxiang blinked her eyes at Yi Li playfully and said with a teasing tone, "Xiao Yao. Okay, I'll go find Murong. You, be careful." After saying that, she gave Mo Jingli a warning look, then waved to Yi Li and turned to leave. Looking at Hua Tianxiang's rare childish behavior, Yi Li found it funny, but she was also very touched. Hua Tianxiang was a real girl from a noble family. If it weren't for herself, she would never take the initiative to provoke Mo Jingli. Looking at Hua Tianxiang's departing figure, Mo Jingli's originally gloomy face could drip ink. When Hua Tianxiang disappeared into the garden, Yi Li put away the smile on her face and turned to look at Mo Jingli. "Prince, what do you want to say?" "Yi Li, good job." Mo Jingli gritted his teeth. Yi Li looked at Mo Jingli from head to toe and said gently, "I don't understand what Prince is talking about." "Humph. Do you think I will just let go of what happened last night?" Mo Jingli stared at her and sneered. "I thought it wasn't Prince's turn to say these words. It was clearly him who found people to kidnap her and wanted to do something bad to her. Why did it seem like she had done something wrong to him? What was wrong with this world?" Yi couldn't help but wonder. Don't tell me you want to take revenge on I. Mo Jingli ridiculed disdainfully. That's not necessary. It's not a big deal. This girl will take revenge on the spot. If Prince doesn't have anything else, Yi will take her leave. Stop right there. Mo Jingli said angrily. He grabbed Yi and pushed her behind the fake mountain. Yi looked down at the hand holding her wrist and her face darkened. Your Highness Prince Li, please have some self-respect. Self-respect? Mo Jingli sneered disdainfully, who do you think you are? You're just a woman that I don't want. Do you think you can do anything just because you're related to Mo Xiaoyao? Tell me, if someone comes over and sees this, do you still have the face to marry Mo Xiaoyao? Or should I say, even that trash Mo Xiaoyao will despise you? Yi Li's half-closed eyes flashed with danger. Your Highness Prince Li, please let me go. What can you do if I don't let you go? Mo Jingli sneered. He looked at the delicate woman in front of him as if he was looking at a caged bird. It was a pity that he didn't know that the woman in front of him looked delicate and graceful, but inside, she was a falcon that could devour people. Yi Li's lips curled up. How is it? Like this. Her free hand grabbed Mo Jingli's arm with agility and strength. With just a little bit of force, he felt a piercing pain. Before Mo Jingli could react, he was thrown to the ground. What was even more unfortunate was that because the two of them were standing under the fake mountain, the back of Mo Jingli's head hit the fake mountain and he fainted on the spot. Yi Li also didn't expect this to happen. She immediately retracted her attack and bent down to check that Mo Jingli was fine. Then she stood up and lifted her leg to kick Mo Jingli a few times to appease her anger. Her previous profession made her more familiar with the human body than most people. Naturally, she knew how to inflict pain without leaving a scar. After calming down the anger in her heart, Yi Li couldn't help but frown. It wasn't a good thing to knock out Prince Li in the princely manner, especially on the day of his wedding. However, it wasn't an unexplainable problem. Glancing at the unconscious person on the ground, Yi Li calmly stepped over the obstacle and calmly walked out. After leaving the fake mountain and passing through a few corners, she saw Hua Tianxiang and Mu Rongting waiting there with worried expressions. Seeing Yi Li walk over, they quickly went up to her. Li, are you alright? Did Prince Li do anything to you? Mu Rongting anxiously grabbed Yi Li and asked. Yi Li smiled, don't you see that I'm fine? What can he do to me in broad daylight? Mu Rongting smiled embarrassedly, I thought too much. However, you should stay away from Prince Li. Hua Tianxiang nodded in agreement and curiously asked, why are you done so quickly? Yi Li spread her hands and said, there wasn't much to say in the first place. Let's not talk about these dampeners. Let's go sit down and drink some tea. I really envy Zheng. Lord Qin never forces Zheng to attend a banquet she doesn't like. Yi Li nodded and walked with the two of them to a place with many people. The wedding was held as scheduled. This made the wedding, which was a little awkward because they had missed the wedding, look forward to a happy ending. That was if they could ignore Prince Li's face, which looked more like he was attending a funeral. Yi Li sat next to Hua Tianxiang and saw Mo Xiaoyao looking at her with a smile. Then his gaze moved to Mo Jingli, who was holding a piece of red silk and walking side by side with Yi Ying. The smile in his eyes deepened. Almost immediately, Yi Li understood that Mo Xiaoyao must have known about what happened to Mo Jingli in the afternoon. However, seeing Mo Xiaoyao's gaze, Yi Li felt that perhaps the matter wasn't over yet. Chapter 50. So, halfway through the ceremony, Yi Li was not surprised at all when the master of ceremonies called for the couple to bow to each other, and then the groom fell to the ground with a plop. Instead, she had a feeling that this was indeed the case. At this moment, Yi Li absolutely believed that Mo Jingli probably did not want to hold another wedding in his life. Anyone who fainted 3 times in less than 24 hours before and after a wedding would have some kind of trauma. How could this be? Mu Rongting was so shocked that she almost could not close her mouth. Hua Tianxiang was also stunned. She did not know what to say. In fact, she began to sympathize with Yi Ying. It was bad enough that the groom missed the auspicious time, but the groom fainted during the wedding. Phew. Li, this Li Wang's health is too poor. Fortunately, everyone was stunned by this sudden change. Only Xian Zhao Taifei reacted and hurriedly sent the bride and groom back to their rooms, and called for the imperial physician. The groom fainted, but the wedding banquet still had to continue, but the guests were somewhat tasteless. The noblewomen guessed the real reason for Li Wang's fainting, and thought about the latest gossip that would appear in the capital tomorrow. Yi Li mentally simulated the consequences of making Mo Jingli faint this afternoon. She felt that there was no big problem, and then enjoyed the delicious food with Hua Tianxiang and Murong Ting. When she glanced at a certain smiling man in an inconspicuous corner and shook a toast to her, she nodded slightly in return. This wedding was really interesting. Madam is here. In the comfortable and elegant Qingyi pavilion, Yi Li was holding a needle and thread and thinking about the embroidery in her hands when Qing Xia came in to report. Yi Li put down the embroidery and looked up. How does she have time to come here? Ever since the blunder at Yi Ying's wedding 2 days ago, Wang Shi had been the busiest mess. These 2 days, there was news in the Fu that concubine Zhao's child and Yi Rong's were incompatible, and it was even more chaotic. Minister Yi also had a headache. On one hand, it was the daughter and only son of Princess Li. On the other hand, it was the most favored concubine and future son. It wasn't that Minister Yi couldn't tell which was more important. But looking at concubine Zhao's weeping face, he still couldn't bear to part with her. Unfortunately, on the second day of Yi Ying's wedding, Yi Rong was inexplicably startled by the carriage on his way to school. He was so frightened that he had to lie in bed for 2 days. Wang Shi made an even bigger fuss. When Wang Shi walked in, she had a rare amiable look on her face when she faced Yi Li. Unfortunately, Yi Li was neither a concubine-born child who had to live at her whims, nor was she a pitiful young girl who didn't know anything. Therefore, she only stood up and greeted her indifferently. Fourth sister is about to return home. How come Madam has the time to come over? With what she thought was an amiable smile, Wang Shi said, the Prince Ding mansion has already chosen a date, and the betrothal gifts will be delivered in 2 days. Li, your wedding date is near. I came to see if there is anything that hasn't been fully prepared. Yi Li asked Wang Shi to sit down and said, Mother Lin and the wet nurse will take care of it. Aunt and Aunt have also come to check on it several times. There is no problem. Thank you for your concern. The smile on Wang Shi's face stiffened. Yi Li's words sounded like she was saying that she had neglected her duty as a legal mother. In fact, Yi Li didn't have such an idea in her heart. Because in her heart, she never thought that Wang Shi had the obligation to organize her wedding. As long as her face was acceptable, it was fine. Actually, I came here today to discuss something with Yi Li. Wang Shi quickly regained her composure and looked at Yi Li eagerly. Yi Li raised her eyebrows and looked at her in confusion. Wang Shi sighed, Li, you must have heard about what happened in the past few days. It's not that I, as the legal wife and legal mother, can't tolerate it. It's just that Zhao's child is at odds with the Yi family's legal child. The day before yesterday, I specially went to Master Ling Su of the Water Cloud Temple. He said that Zhao's child had a grudge with our family in her previous life. She was born to harm our Yi family. You see, ever since the news of her pregnancy spread, our family has been in trouble. But Master still blindly protects her. Yi Li calmly listened to Wang Shi ramble on about her dissatisfaction with Zhao and Minister Yi. Wang Shi deliberately brought up the fact that Zhao's child was at odds with the Yi family's legal child. In terms of legal children, who in the Yi family was more authentic than Yi Li? If she didn't know and didn't believe these things, after seeing Yi Ying's unlucky wedding, she was afraid that she would have a grudge against Zhao and her child. Madam, what do you mean? No matter what, that child is our Yi family's flesh and blood, and also Li Er's biological brother. Father naturally loves him. Yi Li lightly threw the question back to Wang Shi. If Zhao hadn't been on guard against Wang Shi and couldn't find a chance to make a move, why would she come to discuss with her? If she really fell for it and gave her advice, if something happened in the future, she would naturally have to bear the consequences. Wang Shi was startled. She gritted her teeth and forced a smile. No matter what, I'm afraid that child is. Ying's matter has already caused the Yi family to lose face. If something happens to Li Er's marriage, our family will really lose face. Yili lowered her eyebrows and smiled faintly. I'm afraid I can't make the decision on this matter. Madam, you should discuss it with father and grandmother. A woman should follow her husband. What's more, Li Er's wedding has no face to speak of. After getting married, she changed her surname to Mo. Even if that child really wanted to jinx someone, it should be someone with the surname Yi first, right? Seeing that Yi Li was so stubborn, Wang Shi also knew that she couldn't get the result she wanted here. She pretended to comfort Yi Li for a while before holding the almost deformed handkerchief in her hand and left. Miss, Wang Shi's intentions are so sinister. You must not be fooled by her. As soon as Wang Shi left, Mother Lin and Mother Wei came out from the inner room. Mother Wei said with a face full of anger. Yi Li raised her eyebrows and smiled. Nanny, did you see through her intentions? Mother Wei said, what other intentions can there be? She wants to harm concubine Zhao, but she dragged Miss into it. If Miss is soft-hearted and really listens to her words, in the future, when word spreads that a woman interferes with her father's affairs and is heartless to her stepmother and stepbrother, it will ruin Miss's reputation. Mother Lin smiled and comforted Mother Wei. Younger sister, don't be anxious. I think Miss must have a plan in mind. Yi Li nodded and said, Wang Shi certainly can't tolerate concubine Zhao. It's just that there are so many things going on in the Fu right now that she doesn't have the opportunity to act. Mother Lin thoughtfully said, Miss means to save that concubine Zhao. Yi Li shook her head and said, it can't be counted as saving her. These days, concubine Zhao has also helped me a lot. What's more, I think Rong has been taught by Madam to be somewhat improper. Yi family still has a trace of descendants in the future. Mother Lin said, I'm afraid that concubine Zhao will be ambitious in the future. Yi Li waved her hand and smiled. If she's smart, she should know that I have no conflict of interest with her. Chapter 51. Mother Lin thought for a while and smiled. Miss, you are thoughtful. Launa worried too much. Yi Li smiled and shook her head. I'm still young. There are always things I can't consider. In the future, I'll need more advice from mother and wet nurse. In the evening, Wang Shi somehow persuaded Minister Yi to send concubine Zhao back to the Yi family's old house to wait for delivery. Concubine Zhao naturally cried and begged for a long time. The remaining concubines looked at her miserable appearance and couldn't bear it. Yi family's old house wasn't a flat and rich land. It was Bingzhou in the southwest of Dechu State near the border. Not only was it barren, but it was also thousands of miles away from the capital. Since Minister Yi came to the capital and took old Madam Yi over, the Yi family never returned to their old house. In the early years, even the ancestral hall was moved to the capital. In Bingzhou, there was only an old house and some land left for the family to take care of. Not to mention whether concubine Zhao could live well when she went back, whether she could survive the journey while pregnant was a test. Minister Ye's expression was also somewhat unbearable. But looking at his former beloved concubine begging, he didn't relent. Yi Li looked at concubine Zhao's expression faintly. The initial sadness gradually turned into despair. Although there was an element of acting, there was obviously some real feelings in it. Minister Ye's ruthlessness also made concubine Zhao feel bitterly disappointed. Father. Seeing that it was enough, Yi Li said, Bingzhou is far away. The journey is also very difficult. Even ordinary people may not be able to bear it. Not to mention concubine Zhao is pregnant. Minister Ye's expression changed slightly. He looked at Yi Li and said, Li Er, what do you think? Yi Li lowered her eyes and said faintly, since Madam's intention is to send concubine Zhao away from the capital, why do we have to send her to Bingzhou? What if there is something on the road? Sister Zhao Yi is pregnant now. We have to accumulate blessings for her. Wang Shi's face turned white. Her heart trembled with anger. What did she mean by her idea? She even cursed her precious daughter and grandson. Old Madame Yi frowned and said, "Then Lier, where do you think is suitable?" Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "Although we can't not believe in fate, we can't completely believe it either. No matter what, concubine Mother Zhao is still pregnant with our Yi family's child. If outsiders were to find out about this, they would say that the Yi family doesn't care about kinship. As for where concubine Zhao will go, I'm sure father and grandmother have their own plans." Minister Yi took a deep look at Yi Li, and his eyes were obviously probing. "Our family has another courtyard in Yunzhou, and the climate in Yunzhou is also very pleasant. Why don't we send the Zhao clan to Yunzhou? Naturally, everything will be decided by father and grandmother." Old Madame Yi looked at concubine Zhao and smiled at Yi Li. "Your father is right. Yunzhou has many outstanding people and many scholars. Maybe they can suppress this child's destiny." Yi Li said respectfully, "Grandmother is right. As long as the Yi family is doing well, then we will be doing well, right? Destiny? How can a child who hasn't been born have a destiny?" Old Madame Yi nodded with satisfaction. For Yi Li's understanding, she said, "Li is sensible. In that case, this matter is settled." Concubine Zhao knelt in the hall and glanced at the unwilling Wang Shi. She bowed respectfully to old Madame Yi. "This servant thanks old Madame for your grace." "Thank you master and third miss for your grace." Yi Li smiled. "Concubine Zhao, get up quickly. This is the grace of grandmother and father. We as the younger generation can only listen. Concubine Zhao has a long way to go. You should be careful. When my brother is born, I hope concubine Zhao will teach him well so that he won't disappoint grandmother and father." Concubine Zhao nodded repeatedly. "This servant thanks miss for your advice. This servant thanks third miss for saving my life." Concubine Zhao knelt in front of Yi Li. Her simple and elegant dress was completely different from the enchanting in the past. Yi Li raised her hand to signal Qing Luan to help her up. She said lightly, "No need to be so polite. You don't have to worry when you reach Yunzhou. Naturally, someone will arrange everything." Concubine Zhao nodded and said, "This servant believes that third Miss's words are like a mountain. This servant will also abide by the agreement and raise this child." She lowered her head and stroked her still flat belly. Concubine Zhao's brows were full of tenderness and love. In the future, this child will be her everything. Yi Li nodded and ordered Qing Shuang, "Go and get 500 taels of silver for concubine Zhao. Take it as travel expenses." Qing Shuang responded and left. Concubine Zhao looked at Yi Li gratefully. The entire Yi family was under the control of Wang Shi. Of course, this included the various villages. It was inevitable that Wang Shi would secretly deduct her expenses. Although she had saved some money herself, it wasn't much. In the entire Yi family, other than the old matriarch and master, only third miss could take out such a large sum of money at once. Concubine Zhao understood in her heart that although third miss wasn't a warm and amiable person, as long as she was well behaved, she was definitely a reliable and trustworthy person. "Many thanks for third miss's pity. When you get there, someone will be responsible for your and your child's safety. With father there, she won't dare to be too brazen. But if you want to live well there, it will depend on your own methods." Yi Li reminded lightly. In any case, the village wasn't hers. If concubine Zhao had the means, it would be better for the child if she controlled it herself. Concubine Zhao was stunned. She was secretly shocked that Yi Li could see through her thoughts. However, since she had spoken, it naturally meant that the Su family would help her to a certain extent. As long as she had enough means to control Yunzhou's village, it would be a place for her and her child to settle down. Thinking of this, concubine Zhao hurriedly thanked Yi Li again. At the same time, she felt even more reverence in her heart. "Miss, the Ding King's residence has sent the betrothal gifts." Qing Yu walked in with a happy face and smiled. "The old madam and master are asking Miss to hurry over." Yi Li nodded. Seeing Qing Yu's strange expression, she raised her eyebrows and asked, "Is there something else?" Qing Yu's happy expression was somewhat conflicted. Looking at Yi Li, she said, "His Highness King Li and fourth Miss have also returned. Today was the day that Yi Ying would return home." Not knowing if it was intentional or real, the days were so coincidental that fourth Miss's return and third Miss's betrothal gifts actually collided on the same day. Yi Li was also stunned. She had almost forgotten that Yi Ying was also coming back today. What happened? Qing Yu curled her small mouth and said, "King Li and son-in-law arrived at about the same time." His face was gloomy as if someone owed him tens of thousands of taels of silver. What bad luck! Impudent! Yi Li lightly reprimanded. Qing Yu blinked her eyes. She could tell that there was no anger in Mrs. words. Only then did she playfully stick out her tongue, cover her small mouth, and hide to the side. Qing Shuang came out with a plain embroidered pouch and handed it to Yi Li. Yi Li turned around and put it in concubine Zhao's hand along with a gold lock. She said, "This is my gift to my younger brother. I won't give it to concubine when the time comes." Concubine Zhao's eyes reddened. Remembering that today was the day that the Prince Ding mansion would send the betrothal gifts, she hurriedly held back her tears and said goodbye to Yi Li. Only then did she put away the things and walked out. Chapter 52. Yi Li turned her head and said, "Let's go and see grandmother." Because there was no one in the Ding Palace who could be considered as Mo Xiuyao's elder, Mo Xiuyao specially invited two very famous elders from the capital to visit together. The one that Yi Li had met before was the Imperial College's principal Su Zhe and the Empress's father, old Du Qua. These two could be considered as influential figures in the capital and also made Minister Yi feel proud. The long list of betrothal gifts in the Ding Palace reminded people of the last time when the Li Palace sent the betrothal gifts. Originally, it looked good, but now, in comparison, it made people feel that the Li Palace was lacking in sincerity. Therefore, Yi Shangshu invited old Lord Su, old Du Qua and Prince Ding to the study room with a smile. He inadvertently neglected Yi Ying and Mo Jingli, who arrived at the same time. Li pays respect to grandmother. Greetings to old Madame Hua and all the madams. When Yi Li stepped into Rong Le Hall, she saw old Madame Yi and old Madame Hua chatting happily. There were also some familiar madams below who joined in the fun. However, Mo Jingli, Yi Ying and Wang Shi sat at the side with ugly expressions. Wang Shi and Yi Ying obviously could not get a word in, and Mo Jingli's expression probably made people not dare to talk to him. "Li, come over quickly. Everyone, take a look at my granddaughter." Old Madame Yi intimately waved at Yi Li, her turbid eyes were filled with a kind smile. It was as if Yi Li was her most precious granddaughter. Yi Li obediently went forward, "Grandmother." Old Madame Hua pulled Yi Li to sit beside her and smiled, "Old Madame, don't blame this old one for snatching your granddaughter. I like this third miss very much. No wonder that girl, Tian Xiang, has been nagging all day to come and play with third Mississippi." Yi Li smiled and said, "Old Madam is overpraising me. Li also misses Tian Xiang very much." Old Madame Hua nodded repeatedly and said, "Good child, you really have your mother's demeanor. No wonder Xiuyao, that child, refused to go out for so many years, but this time, he specially came to invite our family's old man to propose marriage." Yi Li lowered her head. Her beautiful face was dyed with a faint blush. She chuckled softly, "Old Du Qua hasn't been involved in worldly affairs for so many years." Li is truly. Old Madame Hua nodded secretly. Even if she was shy, she could still be dignified and appropriate. She was not as delicate as the average girl from a noble family. Only this kind of woman would be able to hold such a big family business like the Ding King's residence. She patted Yi Li amiably and said with a smile, "What's the big deal?" The old man had nothing to do now. Naturally, he wanted to worry about the marriage of the younger generation. Xiuyao was also watched by our old man as he grew up. Seemingly thinking of Mo Xiuyao's current situation, old Madame Hua could not help but sigh softly. She instructed Yi Li, "In the future, you will be a family. You must live well. Yi Li pretended to be shy and silently agreed. In her heart, the word embarrassed had already been placed. Seemingly thinking of the coldness of the other newly married couple, old Madame Hua turned to Mo Jingli and said with a smile, "This old one has yet to congratulate Li Wang and Li Wangfei. The Empress Dowager and Xian Zhao Taifei have long been looking forward to holding a grandson. Presumably, the two noble ladies will soon be able to fulfill their wishes." When old Madame Hua opened her mouth, everyone present also hurriedly congratulated Mo Jingli and Yi Ying. Mo Jingli's cold air was really frightening. It made the people who originally wanted to congratulate him not dare to open their mouths. At this time, when old Madame Hua opened her mouth, everyone naturally followed to congratulate. Mo Jingli looked at everyone with a cold face. In the end, he still could not disrespect old Madame Hua, so he nodded lightly. Yi Li sat next to old Madame Hua and just happened to see Yi Ying's expression clearly. Yi Li also felt a little strange. Although there was a situation on the wedding day, it had nothing to do with Yi Ying. With Mo Jingli's love for Yi Ying, it would only make him feel more guilty and treat her better. However, the expressions of these two people really did not look like a bunch of happy newlyweds expressions. Perhaps it was because of Yi Ying's almost unconcealable gloomy expression. Wang Shi's expression did not look good. Fortunately, she still knew to look at the situation. She just kept a calm face and did not flare up. "Prince Ding is here." The voice of a servant's report came from outside the door. Minister Yi accompanied old Duke Hua, old Lord Su Zhe, and Mo Xiaoyao in. Before they came in, old Duke Hua's loud laughter came in. "Ah, I've waited for so many years. Finally, I'm going to drink Prince Ding's wedding wine." "What's the trouble?" "It's a good opportunity to see how the future Princess Ding is and how she can make my servant admit defeat. Li is still young. Old Duke, don't scare her." Mo Xiaoyao's voice was faint with a gentle smile. "Good boy, you know how to protect your wife before the wedding." The hall was quiet. Old Madame Hua pushed Yi Li with a smile and said, "Our family's old master is a rough person. Leave her, don't be offended." Yi Li smiled and shook her head. She looked at the door and saw a man with white hair and a white beard. Although he was close to 70 years old, he still had a majestic gait. Yi Li was born in a military family. When she saw this old man, she knew that he must be a famous general who had spent half his life on the battlefield. She could not help but have a good impression of him. "Prince Li and Princess Li are also here." This old official greets Prince and Princess Li. Old Duke Hua's gaze swept across the people in the hall. His gaze paused on Yi Li for a while before he greeted Mo Jingli and Yi Ying. Mo Jingli nodded and moved his gaze away from Mo Xiaoyao, who came in behind old Duke Hua. He frowned and said, "Old Duke, why are you here?" Old Duke Hua stroked his white beard and smiled proudly. "This old man is here to be a matchmaker for Xiaoyao. I'm here to give the betrothal gifts. Old Madam Yi, come and take a look at the betrothal gifts. Is there anything in the Yi residence that you're not satisfied with? Third Miss, come and take a look too. If there's anything missing, we'll immediately ask someone to make up for it." Old Madam Yi had already roughly looked at the betrothal gifts list once. How could she dare to be dissatisfied? She quickly said with a smile, "Old Duke and old Mr. Su did it personally. How could there be any mistakes?" She handed the list to Yi Li. Yi Li just casually glanced at it. She turned around and handed it to Qing Luan beside her. She smiled faintly and said, "Thank you, old Duke and old Mr. Su." Old Duke Hua looked at Yi Li and turned back to Mo Xiaoyao. He nodded and smiled. The Yi family really knows how to teach girls. Xiaoyao is so lucky. Mo Xiaoyao glanced at Yi Li and smiled without saying anything. Su Zhe also agreed and smiled. Old Duke is right. Third Miss is outstanding in poetry, calligraphy, and painting. Yi family has a good upbringing. After another round of praise and modesty, old Madame Hua sent the two bride-to-be out with the reason that they should cultivate feelings before marriage. Standing outside Lurong Tang, Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao couldn't help but look at each other. Finally, it turned into a faint smile. Let me do it. Yili walked behind Imo Xiaoyao and took over at Jin's position. Jin hesitated for a moment and didn't immediately let go. Imo Xiaoyao raised his hand and said, Jin, you can leave first. The young man looked at Yili with a hint of surprise on his face. Then, there was some respect that wasn't there before. He respectfully handed the wheelchair to Yili, turned around and disappeared in front of the two people. Yili slowly pushed the wheelchair along the flat path to the garden. Imo Xiaoyao slightly tilted his head and said softly, if you're tired, you can stop. Actually, I can do it myself. Chapter 53. I know, but you should also know that I'm not a weak lady from a respectable family. Yili smiled. The wheelchair was clearly made with care, and it didn't take much effort to push it. Yili also believed that even without anyone pushing the wheelchair, Imo Xiaoyao would still be able to move freely. Otherwise, he wouldn't have sent his trusted aide away. Hearing Yili's words, Imo Xiaoyao seemed to have thought of something. He coughed lightly and laughed softly, be more careful these days. Jing Li's other faults are fine, but he loves to hold grudges. It can be said that he will seek revenge for the smallest grievance. Recently, he suffered a few setbacks at your hands, so he won't let it go. Yili nodded and said helplessly, I still don't understand how I offended him. Imo Xiaoyao's faint smile had a hint of ridicule in his eyes. If you acted a little worse after the engagement was broken off, or even tried to kill yourself, he probably wouldn't do anything to you. He might even make it up to you for some reason. Yili was speechless, so, the reason why he treated me like that was because my performance wasn't what he wanted? It's obvious. Really asking for a beating. Walking to the stone table beside the lotus pond, Yili stopped and smiled, let's rest here for a while. It was the beginning of May. There was only a patch of green in the lotus pond, but it made people feel refreshed. The servant girls who were following them from afar immediately left after serving tea and snacks, leaving only Qing Shuang and a few others standing not far away to wait for orders. Imo Xiaoyao smiled, the people around you are all very good. That girl is the one outside the city that night? Her skills are not bad. Yili turned back to look at Qing Luan who was talking to Qing Shuang. She said somewhat embarrassedly, Qing Luan and Qing Yu came with eldest uncle. Only Qing Shuang has been following me. She didn't explain in detail who was Qing Yu and who was Qing Shuang. She believed that Imo Xiaoyao had a rough idea of the people around her. Imo Xiaoyao laughed. So you're from the Su family. No wonder. Li Li also had good foresight. That way, I won't have to worry when I get to the Prince Ding mansion. Yili frowned. Are you talking about the future affairs of the Prince Ding mansion? She had no problem managing a group of highly skilled special forces soldiers. She could even manage a regiment of soldiers. But to ask her to take care of the affairs and properties of a prince's mansion, even if she had these days of learning and practice, she still felt somewhat apprehensive. Yili's conflicted expression clearly pleased Imo Xiaoyao and the smile in his eyes deepened as he said, you are the future mistress of the Ding Palace. I'll tell you about the matters of the palace in advance so that you won't be flustered when the time comes. Is there something wrong? No. Yili shook her head. She understood the principle that she had to plan for her position. I hope I won't make a mess of the palace. I have confidence in Li Li, Imo Xiaoyao smiled. Yili helplessly raised her eyebrows. For your confidence, I don't have any reason to decline. In her heart, Yili really liked this feeling. In reality, she and Imo Xiaoyao didn't get along like an engaged couple. Instead, they were more like friends. They understood each other's thoughts and knew each other's bottom line. Right now, they might not have deep feelings for each other, but they were more comfortable with each other than an engaged couple. Perhaps they could only be friends for the rest of their lives. Perhaps one day, they would become each other's family. But who could say for sure what would happen in the future? But wasn't it something to look forward to? In my current situation, it's not suitable for me to visit Mr. Su and Mr. Su. I hope the two elders will not be offended. Mo Xiaoyao put the teacup in his hand on the table and said apologetically to Yi Li, eldest uncle already knows the situation of the Ding Wangfu. They are not people that pay attention to formalities. But, last time, eldest brother seemed to have said that he had gone to the Ding Wangfu. Yi Li looked curiously at him. She was really curious how a cultured and elegant young master like Su Qingchen would express his dissatisfaction with his future brother-in-law. Mo Xiaoyao smiled helplessly. It's been many years, but Su Gongzi's presence is still enviable. Greetings to Li Wang, greetings to Li Wang Fei. Not far away, Qing Luan and Qing Shuang blocked the path. Mo Jingli sneered. What? I can't walk on this path. Qing Luan and Qing Shuang exchanged a look. This path only led to the lotus pond. There was no other path in front of them. Li Wang clearly saw that their Miss and Prince Ding were here, yet he still insisted on walking forward. Wasn't he looking for trouble? Qing Shuang was about to speak when Mo Xiaoyao spoke. Invite Li Wang and Li Wang Fei over. The two then bowed their heads respectfully. Prince, Wang Fei, please. Mo Jingli snorted and walked quickly to the beautiful couple sitting by the lotus pond. Yi Ying followed behind him and bit her lips bitterly. Mo Jingli stood by the table and looked down at Yi Li. Yi Li frowned. She was very displeased with Mo Jingli's unbridled gaze. Yi Li, sit. Mo Xiaoyao said lightly as he extended his hand to Yi Li. Yi Li grabbed his hand cooperatively and sat beside Mo Xiaoyao. She gave the seat opposite to Mo Jingli and Yi Ying. Mo Jingli sat down without a word. Yi Ying then walked to the three of them while panting slightly. It was obvious that Mo Jingli's unbridled pace was not something a delicate girl like Yi Ying could keep up with. Third sister, Prince Ding. Yi Ying said softly. Yi Li nodded and smiled. Fourth sister, sit down. Have you been well these past few days? Yi Ying lowered her eyes slightly and said softly, thank you for your concern, third sister. I'm well. Yi Li nodded. Seeing Yi Ying say so, she did not ask any more questions. Although Yi Ying didn't look like she was doing well, she didn't really care about her. If Yi Ying really complained to her, she would not know what to do. Mo Jingli snorted and said, Ying is naturally well. I wonder how Li has been these past few days. Yi Li raised her eyebrows and looked sideways at Mo Xiaoyao. She smiled and said, thank you, Prince, for your concern. Other than being a little busy these past few days, everything has been well. Mo Jingli's expression turned cold. He stared at Yi Li for a long time with a gloomy gaze. Then, he said to Mo Xiaoyao, I have some things that I would like to talk to third Miss Yi alone. Yi Li could not help but find it funny. Actually, from the first time she met Mo Xiaoyao, she realized that Mo Jingli loved to put on airs in front of Mo Xiaoyao. For example, if Mo Xiaoyao was present, Mo Jingli would definitely like to look at people with his chin up and a look of contempt. In fact, Yi Li really wanted to tell him that Mo Xiaoyao could only see his nostrils most of the time when he was sitting in a wheelchair. So, Mo Xiaoyao really rarely looked up at him. Also, as long as he talked to Mo Xiaoyao, he would definitely refer to himself as I. It was as if speaking this way would make him superior. In fact, everyone knew that although Mo Jingli was the son of the late emperor and the younger brother of the current emperor, unless he killed his brother and became the emperor himself, his title in this lifetime would be below the first-rank prince of Dinghua. Ying will take her leave first. Prince and sister have a chat. Yi Ying was the first to stand up and respond to Mo Jingli's words. Although she looked at Yi Li with a gaze that was so bitter that it could be mixed with poison. Looking at Yi Ying's figure leaving with a reluctant gaze, Yi Li sighed softly in her heart. In just 2 or 3 days, Yi Ying had changed from a proud daughter of a boudoir to a resentful wife of a wealthy family. It seemed that Mo Jingli did not like Yi Ying as much as the rumors said. In that case, why did Mo Jingli go against the late emperor's will and marry Yi Ying? Was it really just a moment of impulse? Chapter 54. Mo Xiaoyao. Seeing Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li remain unmoved by his words, Mo Jingli angrily roared. Jingli, you really should learn your manners. Mo Xiaoyao calmly stared at Mo Jingli's gloomy face. An invisible pressure made Mo Jingli freeze. Did the emperor allow you to speak to I like this? Compared to Mo Jingli's gloomy and cold face, Mo Xiaoyao's indifferent expression was many times friendlier even with the half-mask on. But even so, Mo Jingli was still shocked and angry to find that he felt a secret fear towards the man in front of him. This made him angry and ashamed, and he couldn't believe it. His last impression of Mo Xiaoyao was from 8 or 9 years ago. At that time, their statuses and situations were very similar. They both came from the most noble families in the Chu state. They both had an older brother. His older brother was the emperor. Mo Xiaoyao's older brother was the Ding prince. They didn't need to inherit the title of nobility. They didn't have any burdens. Even if they ate and drank, they could live a life of luxury. Except for Mo Xiaoyao, he was better than him in everything. So he didn't like Mo Xiaoyao from a young age. When he was immersed in studying to receive his father emperor's praise, Mo Xiaoyao had already received everyone's praise, including his father emperor's. When he was secretly proud of his excellent martial arts, Mo Xiaoyao had already swept through the battlefield, adding even more glory to the Ding kingdom's invincible god of war. When he was young, he hated Mo Xiaoyao, but he wasn't afraid of him. If he didn't like him, then he would fight. Even if he lost, it didn't matter. There would be a day when he would win. But he never would have thought that 8 years after he classified him as trash, he would actually be afraid of him. A great humiliation. Your Highness Princely Yi Li frowned as she looked at Mo Jingli's sinister expression. She didn't doubt that if they were in a different place or a different person, Mo Jingli would have already torn the person to shreds. Prince, if you have something to say, just say it. There is nothing between me and Xiaoyao that cannot be said clearly. Nothing that can't be said? Mo Jingli quickly calmed down and put on a mocking expression. Yi Li, are you sure? Yi Li looked at him in confusion, but Mo Jingli obviously thought that he had caught onto Yi Li's weakness. Then do you want to talk about what happened the night before Ai's wedding and what happened on the day of the wedding? Yi Li looked at him sympathetically. This guy definitely didn't know that Mo Xiaoyao had played a part in his embarrassing fainting on the day of his wedding. Wedding day. Prince, are you saying that you fainted on the spot and delayed the wedding ceremony? At this moment, Yi Li expresses her deep regret and sympathy. Yi Li. Mo Jingli gritted his teeth as he glared at the innocent and sympathetic woman in front of him. I can't go through the wedding ceremony, isn't that what you wanted? Yi Li was at a loss. Prince, what do you mean by that? Although Yi Li and fourth sister don't usually get along well, I'm not so vicious as to want her to fail the wedding ceremony. Prince is slandering Yi Li like this, telling me that I don't have the face to see fourth sister anymore. He wanted to frame her and make Mo Xiaoyao misunderstand. Mo Jingli clearly didn't have enough tricks up his sleeves. Yi Li looked slightly wronged as she stubbornly glared at Mo Jingli. She perfectly acted out the role of a young miss who had been wronged. Mo Xiaoyao, who had originally wanted to speak up to help Yi Li out of her predicament, leisurely looked at the beautiful girl in front of him. Even he couldn't help but want to cheer for her wonderful performance. It seemed that Yi Li really didn't need him to give her any pointers. She could handle most things better than he expected. Just as Mo Jingli was about to fly into a rage again, Mo Xiaoyao spoke up. You don't have to be like this, Li Li. No matter what others say, I will always believe in Li. Yi Li lowered her eyes and softly said, it's great that Xiaoyao believes in me. Otherwise, I really don't know what to do. Yi Li, good job. Mo Jingli finally threw down these words and left like a gust of wind. Yi Li helplessly shrugged and lightly sighed. If you offended someone like Mo Jingli, he would hold a grudge until death. Unless you were willing to throw yourself into the mud to apologize to him and let him humiliate you. Just a normal retreat was definitely not enough. And this person had extremely powerful backers, the current emperor and the current empress dowager. I seem to have made an enemy for you. No, he and I have never been friends. Mo Xiaoyao indifferently said. Yi Li blinked. Can you tell me about it? When I was young, he hid my homework and caused me to be beaten by father. I gave him back the beating of the previous emperor. When I was young, he suspected that I was seducing his sweetheart, so he had someone drug my wine at a banquet. In the end, he drank the wine himself. Once, during a martial arts competition, I accidentally kicked him out of the ring. The next day, I was beaten by more than a dozen experts from the imperial palace. 10 days later, Feng Zhiao and I hung him up on a big willow tree in the capital. It just happened that his sweetheart saw it. As expected, the hatred is as deep as the sea. Yi Li was speechless. Although she had heard people talk about how Mo Xiaoyao was in high spirits when he was young, but looking at the current gentle and quiet man, Yi Li still found it hard to imagine that Mo Xiaoyao was also at the age of being mischievous and mischievous. Feng Zhiao told me that on the day of the wedding, he found the unconscious His Highness Li Wang behind the fake mountain in the garden of the Li Wang Fu. Without a hindrance, Mo Xiaoyao smiled as he looked at Yi Li. Yi Li smiled innocently. It seems that Mo Jingli has offended many people. She could guarantee that no one had seen her move against Mo Jingli. Even Feng Zhiao had only guessed it. Mo Xiaoyao's eyes flashed with a smile. He nodded and said, "That is true." But, even though Jingli has always been brainless, the two in the palace and the virtuous Zhao Dowager are not brainless. So? Yi Li nodded seriously. I understand. The two in the palace and the virtuous Zhao Dowager could be said to have killed their way out of the previous emperor's dozens of concubines and dozens of sons. Naturally, Mo Jingli, this well-protected prince, could not compare to them. Attracting their attention too much would only bring more harm than good. Lowering her head to think, Yi Li said, "I'm just afraid that I've already been targeted." Mo Xiaoyao looked thoughtfully at the servant girls standing not far away. He nodded slightly and said, "No matter who it is, they will not be reassured. They are not targeting you. It's just that you are more likely to attract their attention. Before the wedding, the palace will probably find an excuse to summon you. At that time, bring that girl called Qing Yu with you." Yi Li looked at him in confusion. Mo Xiaoyao explained in a soft voice, "Su de Gongzi told me before that the girl's medical skills are not bad." Yi Li understood. She raised a hand to touch her forehead. She felt a headache. Mo Xiaoyao smiled as he poured a cup of hot tea for her. He asked with a smile, "Headache?" Yi Li nodded honestly, "I don't think so. It's probably because I'm not good at these things. These schemes really gave people a headache. Did these people not know how to be tired?" Chapter 55. Apologies. Mo Xiaoyao looked at her indifferently. Yi Li waved her hand and said without much care, "I'm guessing that even if the emperor doesn't marry me to you, he will marry me to someone he doesn't like." The Su family's background was too special. Even if she was married to someone, the emperor wouldn't give in. Just like the young masters of the Su family. Su Qingchen was already 22 years old. He wasn't married or engaged, but the emperor had never considered marrying him. She even suspected that the emperor hoped that Su Qingchen would never marry in this lifetime. Even if he did marry, it would be best if he was married to a woman from a family with a reputation and no power like Su Qingze. Otherwise, it would be marrying a princess. Thinking of this, Yi Li raised her head and asked, "Are there any unmarried princesses in the palace?" Mo Xiaoyao nodded and said, "The previous emperor's youngest princess, Princess Lin Lang, and the current emperor's eldest princess, Princess Fang Fei, are both 12 years old this year." Why? Yi Li shook her head and hoped that she was thinking too much. It wasn't very likely that Su Qingchen would marry a 12-year-old girl. But there was still Su Qingbai and Su Qingyan. Seeing Yi Li's expression, Mo Xiaoyao guessed what she was thinking. He nodded and said, "Back then, the emperor and even the previous emperor had hinted that they wanted to marry the princess to Su Qingchen, but they were all rejected by Sir Qingyun. The Su family not marrying imperial daughters was a strange example among the noble families of the Chu state. It had to be known that marrying a princess meant that he would no longer have any relations with the court and power. He could only wear the title of prince consort and live a life of luxury. This was definitely a nightmare for the ambitious young masters of the rich and powerful families. However, many noble families were still willing to let their second son, who had no right to inherit, marry a princess. After all, this meant that the family's bloodline would merge with the imperial family. It meant that they would receive the emperor's favor and glory. However, in the history of the Su family, which had existed for hundreds of years, there were at least 5 sons who had refused to marry a princess. 100 years ago, the head of the Su family had set a rule that the sons of the Su family could not marry into the imperial family, not even the sons of concubines. Therefore, the imperial family no longer brought up the matter of marrying the princess to the Su family. The palace should already know that eldest uncle and the others have entered the capital, right? Yi Li asked. Mo Xiaoyao nodded. Although he said he entered the capital privately, Master Hongyu did not deliberately hide his tracks. This kind of thing couldn't be hidden if it was really investigated. Minister Yi was loyal to the current emperor. Hiding things will only make people suspicious. Yi Li smiled and said, "That makes sense. I still need to pay my respects to first uncle later. It just so happens that I have a lot of things to ask him for advice on. Say hello to Mr. Hongyu for me." In Wang Shi's Fangi courtyard, Yi Ying was sobbing miserably in Wang Shi's arms. Wang Shi dismissed the maidservants in the room and hugged her daughter to comfort her. What's wrong? They had just gotten married, so how did things turn out like this? Did King Li mistreat you? Yi Ying raised her head and looked at her mother's worried and loving face. She cried even more sorrowfully, sob. Mother, is so miserable, what's wrong? Did King Li really mistreat you? Good daughter, don't be afraid. Let's go back and tell your father. Your father loves you the most. He will definitely stand up for you, Wang Shi hurriedly said. Yi Ying wiped her tears and cried, what can father do? What does he dare to do to the Li Palace? When the Li Palace casually sent the betrothal gifts, he didn't say anything. Father doesn't love me at all. Wang Shi was speechless. Saying that the Li Palace's betrothal gifts were poor was only relative to the grandeur of the Prince Ding mansion. With the betrothal gifts personally handled by the virtuous consort, it was impossible for the Li Palace to lose face. Moreover, Yi Ying was very satisfied at that time. However, now that she saw the Prince Ding mansion solemnly invite Duke Hua and Old Master Su to send the betrothal gifts, Yi Ying felt that she could not compare to Yi Li and lost face. Although Wang Shi felt somewhat uncomfortable in her heart, she still knew the severity of the matter. She gently patted Yi Ying's back, who was choking with sobs, and said, "Silly child, how can you blame your father for this? There was nothing wrong with the Li Palace's betrothal gifts. You know it yourself, don't you? If there was something wrong, how could your father and grandmother let you get married like this? It's just that Yi Li's wedding date is set after yours. Even if the Prince Ding mansion wanted to maintain their face, they had to let her get a better betrothal gift than you. But think about it, other than the betrothal gifts, what else does she have? King Li is the emperor's younger brother. He is skilled in both civil and martial arts. His appearance is also one of the best in the capital. That Prince Ding is now just an idle prince with no power or influence. He is also in a wheelchair and has a disfigured face. No matter what, you are much better than her, aren't you?" Yi Ying bit her cherry lips in grievance and said softly, "But Prince Ding mansion still has a few concubines." Wang Shi was stunned and then laughed. She hugged Yi Ying and said with a smile, "Silly daughter, which man doesn't have a few women in his room? You have to remember that you are King Li's wife. Don't you see that we also have a lot of women in our family? So what? Aren't they all obedient to me? Come, tell your mother how you've been these past few days." When it came to Yi Ying's newlywed life, it could not be described with the word miserable. On the day of the wedding, they missed the auspicious hour and the groom fainted. After Mo Jingli fainted, he was sent back to the bridal chamber. He asked the imperial physician to take medicine, but he did not wake up. As a newlywed wife, Yi Ying could only take off the red veil herself and then take care of her unconscious husband with an empty stomach. When Mo Jingli woke up, it was close to 5 o'clock. Not to mention the bridal chamber, Yi Ying did not even have time to rest. She hurriedly dressed up and went to pay respects to Xian Zhao Dowager Consort. Xian Zhao Dowager Consort was not satisfied with this daughter-in-law. Looking at Yi Ying's ugly face that could not be hidden even with heavy makeup, she exploded on the spot. She criticized Yi Ying's clothes and behavior. The most unbearable thing for her was that the one being compared by Xian Zhao Dowager Consort was Yi Li, who Yi Ying hated the most. Yi Ying, who was originally confident in herself, heard Xian Zhao Dowager Consort talk about how Yi Li was elegant and dignified when she saw her yesterday, and how frivolous and rude Yi Ying was. How Yi Li spoke appropriately, and how Yi Ying did not know when to stop. Yi Ying finally could not help but explode and talk back. Xian Zhao Dowager Consort was furious and made Yi Ying kneel for a quarter of an hour when she served tea. In the end, Mo Jingli waited impatiently and let Yi Ying get up. If it was Yi Li, she would definitely tell Yi Ying, "Poor child, you have been fooled by Xian Zhao Dowager Consort. She deliberately tormented you." Xian Zhao Dowager Consort was like a fish in water in the palace for decades. How could she get angry so easily? It was obvious that she deliberately picked on Yi Ying's weakness and took the opportunity to attack Yi Ying. It could also be said that she wanted to give her a show of strength. If the unlucky things stopped here, Yi Ying would not do anything. However, when she finally returned to her courtyard after serving the Dowager Imperial concubine for breakfast, she saw 4 or 5 women dressed in bright and beautiful clothes waiting for her. Each of them had their own merits. Yi Ying almost spat out a mouthful of blood. She never knew that Mo Jingli already had 5 concubines before the wedding. And she could not do anything to these concubines because they were either bestowed by Xian Zhao Dowager Consort or Empress Dowager. They were either the legitimate daughters of small officials or the daughters of concubines of high officials. Yi Ying kept recalling her grandmother's teachings. She used all her strength to suppress her anger and deal with those women. When she returned to her room, what waited for her was not the gentle new husband, but the chief steward and the steward of the manor holding the cold account books. Yi Ying was indeed a talented woman skilled in zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting. But she was not good at managing the household and accounting. She used to dislike these tacky things because they would tarnish her elegant temperament. But under the frown of Xian Zhao Dowager and the stewards, she felt for the first time that she was an idiot. 2 days later, before she could figure out the account books that seemed to never be finished, Xian Zhao Dowager Consort coldly told her that she did not need to manage these accounts anymore. Yi Ying breathed a sigh of relief but also understood that she had lost the right to manage Li Wangfu. Chapter 56. After listening to Yi Ying's words, Wang Shi's face turned ugly. If Yi Ying didn't have the right to manage the mansion, then her position as Princess Consort Li was just a decoration. For the first time, Wang Shi regretted that she spoiled and indulged her daughter too much. If she had taught her more, she wouldn't have encountered such a problem. But Wang Shi didn't understand. Compared to virtuous consort Zhao, even if she went herself, it would be useless, let alone teaching more. From the beginning, Yi Ying was destined not to get the rights that a mistress of the mansion should have. Then, what does Prince Li mean? Wang Shi pulled Yi Ying and asked. Yi Ying said with tears, "Prince said that Consort Zhao took pity on me because I was young, so she helped me manage the mansion. It won't be too late to take over after 2 years when I have a child and have learned enough." Wang Shi had a flash of inspiration. "Right, child. Prince is right. You should give birth to the eldest son for Prince as soon as possible. You have to remember, it's the eldest son. You can't let those women give birth to Prince Li's child before you." Yi Ying was shocked and looked at Wang Shi hesitantly. Wang Shi said softly, "Good child, don't be afraid. I will tell you what to do. You are Prince Li's wife, So it's natural for you to give birth to a son for Princely. So, those women can't get pregnant before you. Do you understand? Looking at the cold light in Wang Shi's eyes, Yi Ying nodded quickly. Wang Shi smiled with satisfaction and pulled Yi Ying to sit down and talk in detail. The mother and daughter, one was teaching and the other was learning. Just when they were talking, the servant outside the door came to report that the master was here. Wang Shi was overjoyed and pulled Yi Ying with a smile. Look, your father still cares about you. She quickly pulled Yi Ying up to greet Minister Yi. When Minister Yi came in and saw Yi Ying, he was startled at first and then said, Ying, why are you here? Yi Ying lowered her head bitterly and said, Ying is back, so I'm here to talk to mother. Where does father think I am? Minister Yi frowned slightly and couldn't help but look at Yi Ying. He felt that his daughter seemed to be a little different after not seeing her for a few days. But soon he concluded that she was a married daughter who had grown up, so he didn't ask any more questions. After Minister Yi sat down and served tea, Wang asked, Master, why are you here at this time instead of accompanying Duke Hua and Old Master Su? Minister Yi said, Old Duke and Old Lord Su went back after the banquet. I came to discuss with you about Li Er's dowry. Wang Shi had a bad premonition in her heart. Li Er's dowry? Wasn't it already prepared? Is there any other problem, Master? Minister Yi nodded. He glanced at Yi Ying who was sitting at the side and said, I've discussed with my mother. We'll add 2 more manors, 1 courtyard, 2 shops, and 8,000 taels of silver to Li Er's dowry. What? Wang Shi screamed and almost knocked over the teacup in front of her. Yi Ying also looked at Minister Yi in disbelief. Minister Yi frowned with dissatisfaction and said, This is what the old lady wants. Wang tried her best not to scream. She looked at Minister Yi with red eyes and asked, Why? You and Ying were also Master's legitimate daughters and old Madam's biological granddaughters. The old Madam was being a little too biased. It's fine if you is in the palace, but how can Ying stand in the Li Palace in the future? Minister Yi said impatiently, What nonsense are you talking about? You know clearly what happened to Ying's dowry. How much did you put in? Do you think old Madam and I don't know? Wang Shi said softly with some unwillingness, Didn't Li put in anything else? When eldest young lady got married, her dowry was not even a fraction of hers. Minister Yi said coldly, Don't you know where the dowry that Li Er's mother left for Zhen went? Also, the extra part of Li Er's dowry was left by her mother. It's from the Su family. The extra part of Ying's dowry is from the Yi family. Master. Wang Shi looked at Minister Yi with a sorrowful face. Her body was also on the verge of collapsing. I knew it. Master, you have always looked down on me. Just because my family was born in a humble family and was not as noble as my sisters. Before she could finish, Wang Shi was already in tears. Sob sob. If I had known earlier, I would have implicated my daughter and caused her to be despised by the old master. I would have been better off dead. What nonsense are you talking about? Looking at his wife's sorrowful appearance, Minister Ye's heart softened. Thinking that he had been neglecting her for Zhao's sake these days, he said helplessly. Wang Shi had tears in her eyes and looked at Minister Yi sadly, Did Master not look down on me? Minister Yi said, All right, don't think too much. When did I look down on you? Only then did Wang Shi stop crying and looked at Minister Yi emotionally, knows that Master will always be good to Minister Yi looked at Yi Ying and made an uneasy sound of agreement. Yi Ying, who was sitting on the side, was also thoughtful. She was still very surprised by her mother's means of winning over her father. Although she felt that it was unbearable for her mother to act like a shy young girl, it was obvious that her father liked it. She also remembered the first madam. It could be said that Yi Ying had been working hard for a woman like the first madam since she was a child. So she actually didn't quite understand why her father would give up such a beautiful and elegant woman like the first madam and favor her mother more. For a time, she even doubted whether she was really working hard in the wrong direction. But after growing up, the praise of the noble ladies in the capital and the admiring eyes of men made her understand that she was not wrong. Master, then. Li Er's dowry, Minister Yi frowned and said, this is the old madam's decision. If you still have any opinions, you can talk to the old madam. Although Minister Yi was a little confused about his own private affairs, he was not too confused about business. He immediately pushed old Madam Yi out as a shield. Of course, Wang Shi didn't dare to ask old Madam Yi. If she dared to challenge old Madam Yi, she would have thought of a way to poison that old woman who always looked at her with her nostrils and liked to criticize her. Seeing that his wife and daughter were aggrieved and didn't dare to speak, Minister Yi sighed and said, you also know what the Prince Ding Mansion's dowry is like. Although there is the dowry left by Li Er's mother, outsiders can't see anything. But which noble family in the capital doesn't know the root of the matter? If there is any gossip, our Yi family can no longer live in the capital. If they were greedy for the rich dowry of the son-in-law's family but couldn't give the corresponding dowry, they would be poked at by others. Wang Shi thought of the long list of dowry from the Prince Ding Mansion and had to admit that even if the Ding Mansion had declined, it was still a big family with a rich family background. If this matter is spread out, the Ding Mansion and Li Er will not be embarrassed. It's our Yi family and Zhao Nyang in the palace. Minister Yi continued. At the mention of Zhao Yi in the palace, Wang Shi's expression wavered. But when she thought of the tens of thousands of silvers that she had to give out, her heart ached again. After thinking for a while, she faintly said, Master and old madam have considered it thoroughly. It's me who thought wrongly. Master, please don't take offense. Just do as Master said. I don't have the mood to care about these things now. Chapter 57. When Minister Yi heard this, he looked at her in surprise. What? What happened to Ying He? Wang Shi pulled Yi Ying and told her everything that happened in Prince Li's mansion in detail. Hearing this, Minister Yi couldn't help but get angry. Yi Ying might not see that concubine Xian Zhao deliberately wanted to take away her right to be the housekeeper, but how could Wang Shi and Minister Yi not see it? Who has ever heard of a new daughter-in-law being in charge of the household on the first day? And she directly concluded that Yi Ying was not suitable to be the housekeeper after 2 days? Even the harshest evil mother-in-law didn't do this. This is too much. I'll go to Prince Li and ask him to give my Yi family an explanation. Minister Yi said angrily. Yi Ying quickly pulled Minister Yi and didn't let him go. Minister Yi frowned and said, Ying He, what are you doing? Yi Ying whispered, Father, let's put this matter aside first. Prince has already promised the old concubine. Even if I say it now, it will only make the prince unhappy. After crying, and with Wang Shi's consolation, Yi Ying was very clear that her only support now was Mo Jingli, so she must not make him unhappy. Are we just going to let it go like this? Minister Yi said. Comparing the gentle and polite Mo Xiaoyao and the arrogant Mo Jingli, Minister Yi was even more dissatisfied with this son-in-law. Why did Prince Ding have such an identity and situation? Minister Yi thought with regret. Ying He will think of a way. If it still doesn't work, I'll ask father to make the decision. Minister Yi sighed softly and said to his daughter with pity, well, although Prince Li is the son of the Empress Dowager, we don't have to be so afraid of him. The Emperor is not an unreasonable person. If it really doesn't work, we'll ask the Emperor to make the decision. Go back and prepare some silver for Ying Er. Yes, I thank Master on behalf of Ying Er. Mo Xiaoyao's guess was not wrong. Less than 2 days after the betrothal gifts were sent, someone from the palace came to pass Yi Zhaoyi's decree, saying that she missed the third miss and invited the third miss to the palace to meet her. Yi Li knew very well who wanted to see her. When Yi Yu was at home, her relationship with her was not so bad that everyone knew about it, but it was definitely not better than her relationship with Yi Ying. Unfortunately, although Yi Li was only a Zhaoyi, she had not officially become Princess Ding. Yi Li had no right to refuse her. Therefore, she had no choice but to accept the decree and return to her courtyard to change into a decent set of clothes. Then, she brought Qing Luan and Qing Yu with her and followed the eunuch who came to deliver the message into the palace. The Chu capital was located in the north of the Chu state. Most of the palaces there were lofty and majestic. As soon as they got off the carriage, they were greeted by the majestic aura of the royal family. Unlike the elaborate decorations of ordinary nobles, the imperial city was more prominent in its grandeur and majesty. The five-clawed golden dragon on the huge stone pillar seemed to be warning the world that imperial power was inviolable. Those who came here for the first time would definitely be awed by its magnificence, but Yi Li, who had long been accustomed to seeing 100-foot-tall buildings, scenic spots, and historical sites, could only give it faint praise. After getting off the carriage at the gate of the palace, Yi Li followed the eunuch who led the way and entered the inner palace. While walking, she looked at the environment of the palace without leaving a trace and memorized her location. After passing through layers of palace gates, she finally stopped in front of a gorgeous palace. Yi Li looked up, Yaohua Palace. Yi Li remembered that Yi Yu was granted to live in Yaohua Palace. "Third Miss Yi, please wait for a moment. I'll go in and report," the eunuch who led the way said in a sharp voice. Yi Li nodded and said, "Eunuch, please go ahead." After the eunuch went in to report, he did not come out quickly. Yi Li stood there for nearly an incense stick's worth of time, but no one came out. Qing Yu whispered, "Miss, what does Zhao Yinyang mean by this?" Qing Luan reprimanded in a low voice, "Don't talk too much." Miss didn't say anything, "Why are you talking too much?" Qing Yu also understood that the imperial palace was not a place where one could talk at will at home. She blinked her eyes in shame and kept silent. Yi Li said with a smile, "Don't be impatient." Qing Luan hesitated for a moment, looked around, and whispered, "Miss, could it be that Zhao Yinyang?" Yi Li shook her head and said with a smile, "Zhao Yinyang will not use such a dirty method." Qing Yu and Qing Luan were both very intelligent. After hearing Yi Li's words, they immediately understood. They shut their mouths and stopped talking. Wasn't it just standing there and waiting? One of them was a martial artist, and the other had studied medicine since childhood. Neither of them was a weak person. After another quarter of an hour, no one came out of Yaohua Palace. Instead, a group of people came over shakily not far away. Looking at the extravagance, it must be a noble coming out. Yi Li and the other two stepped aside to avoid bumping into the other party. Soon, the group of people had walked to the gate of Yaohua Palace. A group of palace maids and eunuchs surrounded two women in palace attire. They stopped not far from Yi Li. One of the women in blue looked at Yi Li curiously and said, "Hey. This miss looks unfamiliar. Why are you standing here?" Yi Li had to step forward and bow. Yi Li, the third daughter of the Ministry of Revenue, greets the two noble ladies. It turned out to be the future Princess Ding. We don't dare to accept it. The woman in pink quickly moved aside and covered her mouth to laugh. "Third Miss Yi, why are you standing here? Are you here to visit Zhao Yinyang?" Yi Li nodded and smiled. "It is Zhao Yinyang's order to have an audience." "In that case, let's go in together." The woman in blue pulled Yi Li. Yi Li smiled and said, Yi Li entered the palace for the first time and didn't know the rules. "I didn't dare to enter without being summoned by Zhao. I won't waste the two noble ladies' time." Yi Li, thanks again. The two women looked at each other. The woman in pink smiled and said, "In that case, let's go in first. Sister Zhao is pregnant now and easily tired. She must have fallen asleep and the people below don't dare to disturb her. Third Miss Yi, please wait a moment." "Thank you." "Miss, why don't we go in with them?" Qing Yu asked softly. She didn't know if it was her illusion, but there seemed to be more people passing by on this road than when they first came. Yi Li looked back at her and asked with a smile, "Do you think we will be driven out if we go in?" "It shouldn't be, right?" Qing Yu said with some uncertainty. Yi family's miss was driven out. Her miss would lose face, but Zhao Yinyang wouldn't be any better. "Hey, over here, over here." Yi Li looked back and saw a small head under a flowering tree in the corner of the hall not far away. The head was smiling and waving at her. Yi Li looked around and then raised her hand to point at herself. The child, whose body was half hidden in the flowering tree, nodded at her. Come here. Miss? Yili waved her hand and slowly walked over. You are Prince Sting's uncle's future princess? There was a delicate and cute little girl squatting in the bushes. She was about 7 or 8 years old and had a cute bun on her head. There were 2 strings of sparkling pearls in the bun. Her exquisite clothes were embroidered with golden phoenix patterns. It was obvious that this child's identity was not ordinary. I am. Who are you? I won't tell you. The little girl opened her big bright eyes and looked at her with a smile. Chapter 58. Yili did not mind. Smiling, she asked, Then do you know Prince Sting? Have you met him? Lying is not a good child. Everyone knows that Prince Sting has not left home for many years. He is probably as old as you are. The young girl gave her a look of disdain. If I haven't met him, why can't I hear it from others? Cousin Xiang told me that Uncle Prince Sting is the best martial artist in the world. He is the smartest, the most handsome, and the most powerful person. When I grow up, I want to marry him. Cousin Xiang. Seeing the earnest expression on the young girl's face, Yili could not help but want to laugh. However, she did not want to attack the young girl's fragile heart. Do you know how old Prince Sting is? By the time you grow up, he will be old. At that time, there will be someone with higher martial arts than him, smarter than him, and better looking than him. At that time, he will no longer be the most powerful person. What are you going to do? Oh? The young girl was at a loss. Then what should I do? No, you are lying to me. You are the one who wants to marry Uncle Prince Sting. That is why you are lying to me. I am not lying to you. You see, I am much older than you right now, right? You can only marry when you are as old as me. At that time, I will also be old. Prince Sting is older than both of us. When you see. The young girl sighed resentfully. When the time comes, Uncle Prince Sting will definitely be older than maternal grandfather. If I marry him, I will definitely be laughed at by eldest imperial sister. Fine, Uncle Prince Sting will be yours. Yili held back her laughter. Nodding her head, she sincerely replied, Okay. Thank you, Your Imperial Highness. How do you know that I am a princess? Yili blinked her eyes. Not only do I know that you are a princess, I also know which princess you are. I don't believe you. You have never seen this princess. Yili smiled and said, I am guessing that you are the Empress' daughter, Princess Changel, right? The young princess tilted her head and sized up Yili for a while before nodding her head. Fine, I agree with Cousin Xiang's words. You are indeed very intelligent. This princess reluctantly accepts you as a friend. Looking at the little girl trying her best to act like an adult and a princess, Yili smiled and said, Okay, thank you for your appreciation, Your Highness. Why is the princess here? Anne. He pointed at the flowering tree where the little princess was hiding. Princess Changel unconcernedly twisted her body, continuing to hide in the thicket. This princess has heard that the Yi family produces beauties. Yi Jiaoyi and Yi Ying, who was about to be blown away by the wind, were famous beauties. So this princess came to see if the Yi family is really full of beauties. Now this princess admits that you are more pleasing to the eye than Yi Jiaoyi and Yi Ying. She could barely be considered a beauty. I'm guessing you'll have to wait for a long time. How about it? Why don't you come and play with this princess? Yili was puzzled. How do you know that it'll take a long time? Princess Changel curled her small lips. My Empress mother said that the women in the palace are all idle and have nothing to do. As a result, they strive to find work for others. If someone is not pleasing to the eye, they will have her wait a bit longer when paying respects. Kneeling a bit longer is something that these women love to do the most. However, you can be at ease. My Empress mother will not do such a thing. Yili smiled but did not speak. Princess Changle glared at her in dissatisfaction. Are you going to go out and play with me or not? Yi Li helplessly shook her head. I still have to wait for Yi Jiaoyi to summon me. You know that if she can't find me when she wants to see me, it will be very troublesome. Also, someone's coming. Princess Changle glanced outside and immediately withdrew her small head. Noble consort Lu has arrived. Don't say that you've seen me. She hates you the most. Yi Li nodded her head, helping her restore the flowering tree to its original state. I understand. Quickly return. Don't make Her Imperial Majesty worry. After restoring the thicket, Yi Li stood up and walked back to where Qinghuan and Qingyu were standing, waiting for the arrival of an even grander procession. From a distance, one could smell the faint fragrance of flowers. Escorted by groups of palace maids and eunuchs was a woman wearing a goose-yellow palace dress embroidered with hibiscus and phoenix. Her graceful figure was wrapped in the fitting palace dress, revealing her graceful curves. Her snow-white skin was picturesque, and her cherry lips were slightly curved. Her appearance was 70% charming and 30% cold. These days, Yi Li had seen many beautiful women. Qin Zheng was as elegant as an orchid, Hua Tianxiang was as graceful as a peony, Princess Xixia was as gorgeous as a peach blossom, and this noble consort Lu was as beautiful as a pear blossom, pure white and charming. Although she appeared delicate, she carried a trace of unattainable coldness. You are Yi Li. Noble consort Lu stopped in front of Yi Li and asked indifferently. This subject is indeed noble consort Lu. Greetings, noble consort Lu. Yi Li curtsied slightly. Noble consort Lu's delicate eyebrows slightly raised. You shouldn't have entered the palace before, right? How do you know who I am? Yi Li slightly smiled and said, a few years ago, the emperor worshipped the heavens. I was lucky enough to see your face, so I still remember. Noble consort Lu was slightly stunned and said with a sigh, that should be 5 or 6 years ago, right? It's amazing that you can remember at such a young age. Your Highness is so beautiful that it's unforgettable. Yi Li said with a smile. You are more likable than your second sister. Why are you standing here? Go in with Yi Jiaoyi must have fallen asleep. She actually left the future Princess Ding at the gate of the palace. Noble consort Lu said indifferently, but her tone showed that she couldn't refuse. Yi Li paused for a moment and slightly curtsied. She said, then, please go in first. In Yaohua Palace, when Yi Yu saw Yi Li coming in with noble consort Lu, she couldn't help but be stunned. Noble consort Lu looked at her indifferently. Sister saw third Miss Yi waiting outside the door, so I invited her in. Sister, you won't blame me for being nosy, right? Although she said so, noble consort Lu didn't look like she was afraid that she would be offended. Yi Yu pulled the corner of her mouth and said with a forced smile, Sister noble consort, you must be joking. It's all my fault that I'm always listless these days and always forget things. If sister didn't bring third sister in, third sister would have been wronged for a long time. It's all because of you servants. Why didn't you remind I? Her charming phoenix eyes glanced at the palace maids and eunuchs. Suddenly, the palace was full of begging. Noble consort Lu frowned impatiently and said, that's enough, sister. Forget it if you forgot. Why bother the servants? I don't think third Miss Yi will blame you. Isn't that right? Yi Li had to follow her words. She said, noble consort Lu, you must be joking. I just waited for a while. There's nothing to be offended about. Yi Yu's face relaxed. She pulled Yi Li to sit in front of her and said with a smile, third sister doesn't like to go out. I haven't seen third sister since I came to the palace. Now I finally see you. I haven't seen third sister for 1 or 2 years. Third sister has become more and more outstanding. How is your family? Yi Li answered one by one. Yi Yu kept asking Yi Li about some trivial things, and Yi Li just answered respectfully. The strange thing was that noble consort Lu seemed to be completely unaware of the meeting between sisters and family members. She just sat there and listened. There was no place for her to interrupt, but she didn't care. She just sat there with a cold smile. Yi Yu seemed to be used to noble consort Lu's behavior. She didn't ask her to leave or take Yili away. Chapter 59. I can't go to my fourth sister's wedding. How is she and Prince Li? Yili asked Yi Yu with a smile while stroking her slightly protruding belly. Yili remembered Yi Ying's gloomy face when she returned home 2 days ago. It was really not good. But now she didn't intend to say it to make Yi Yu feel uncomfortable. She just said with a smile, fourth sister and Prince Li are newly married. Of course they are good. I'm a little busy now. I didn't have time to talk to you. Yi Yu already knew that Yi Li and Yi Ying's relationship was not good, so she didn't care. She just took Yi Li's hand and said with a smile, we are sisters. After marriage, we don't have to see each other all the time at home. It's not a bad idea to walk around more. I can't do anything in the palace. You sisters can take care of each other outside. So father and grandmother don't worry. Don't you think so? Yi Li nodded and said, you're right. The two sisters were talking about Yi Mansion when a servant came in and said that Empress Dowager wanted to see third Miss Yi. Yi Yu was stunned for a moment. Then she turned to Yi Li and said with a smile, since Empress Dowager wants to see you, third sister, go quickly. Empress Dowager is the ruler of the world. She loves the younger generation the most. Third sister, don't be afraid. It's not convenient for me to go with you. Yi Li nodded. She looked at Yi Yu's well-maintained jade fingers and gently stroked her abdomen. She nodded faintly and said, thank you for your advice, Your Highness. Since this is the case, I will take my leave. Yi Yu smiled and said, third sister, take care. Servants, escort third miss out for me. Sister, I also want to pay respect to Empress Dowager. You can go with third Miss Yi. Noble consort Lu stood up and said. Yi Yu nodded, in this case, I'll have to trouble sister noble consort. Noble consort Lu nodded lightly, third miss, let's go. Yi Li followed noble consort Lu out of Yaohua Palace. She looked back at the richly decorated palace gate. When Yi Yu said that Empress Dowager wanted to see her, if she didn't see wrong, Yi Yu was nervous. As for noble consort Lu, she took a look at noble consort Lu who was walking in the front with her entourage. Until now, she still couldn't tell whether noble consort Lu was a friend or a foe. Accompanying her into Yaohua Palace, and then accompanying her to see the Empress Dowager. Yi Li was sure that if noble consort Lu hadn't been sitting there the whole time, Yi Yu would have said more than that. But Yi Li couldn't believe that noble consort Lu was good to her, not to mention that they had never met each other before. She didn't even bother to hide her contempt under her faint arrogance. Helplessly shrugging, Yi Li calmly followed behind. The people in the palace were really troublesome. The palace where the Empress Dowager lived was located in the northwest part of the imperial city. Its area was twice the size of Yaohua Palace, and the splendid pavilions and palaces revealed the noble status of the emperor's birth mother. Zhangde Palace was specially built for the Empress Dowager after the emperor ascended the throne. Standing in front of Zhangde Palace and waiting for the summons, noble consort Lu looked back at Yi Li and said lightly, also, don't listen to your sister's nonsense. The Empress Dowager isn't a good-tempered person. Be careful. Yi Li pursed her lips and said with a faint smile, thank you for your advice. Noble consort Lu snorted, flicked her sleeves and stepped into Zhangde Palace first. Yi Li followed behind. Although her face was calm, her mind had already turned hundreds of times. Although she hadn't been in the palace for long, the strangeness of the imperial palace was beyond her understanding. It was said that the Empress Dowager helped the emperor ascend the throne. The Empress Dowager was a famous virtuous concubine. But noble consort Lu, as the emperor's favorite concubine, didn't respect the Empress Dowager at all. Also, she looked up at the three large characters on the horizontal board under the eaves. Zhangde, she hoped the emperor was willing to write it. Yi Li greets the emperor, greets the Empress Dowager. Walking into the hall and seeing the tall man in a bright yellow robe, Yi Li's face flashed with a trace of surprise, but she quickly bowed respectfully. Rise. Chang, why are you here? Mo Jingqi glanced at Yi Li, then his eyes fell on noble consort Lu. He stood up and walked down the stairs to pull noble consort Lu in front of him. Noble consort Lu snorted and said lightly, What? Does the emperor feel that I can't greet the Empress Dowager? Mo Jingqi sighed and said softly, You know, I'm not like this. Your Majesty. A voice with a trace of sternness and displeasure came from the hall. Yi Li glanced at it secretly. The Empress Dowager must have been a great beauty when she was young. Although she was the elder sister of Consort Xianzhao, the Empress Dowager looked younger than Consort Xianzhao. Her phoenix eyes gave people an indescribable sense of sharpness, but Yi Li knew that her eyes must have been enchanting and beautiful when she was young. At this time, the Empress Dowager didn't notice Yi Li, but cast her sharp eyes on noble consort Lu. She could even feel a trace of murderous intent in her eyes. Obviously, the Empress Dowager didn't like noble consort Lu very much. Mother. Mo Jingqi frowned and took noble consort Lu to the hall, saying, Mother, Chang came to greet you. She must have met third Miss Yi and came together. The Empress Dowager said lightly, Greet? It's rare for noble consort Lu to remember to greet me today. Mother, you know that Chang's health hasn't been good since she gave birth to Jing. Mo Jingqi looked a little embarrassed, but he still firmly protected noble consort Lu by his side. Peeking at the Empress Dowager's gloomy face, Yi Li wanted to sympathize with her. She finally gave birth to 2 sons. After the late emperor died, Empress Yuan became the empress. She worked hard to send her sons to the throne. She should be happy as the Empress Dowager. Who knew that the youngest son was occasionally stupid, and the eldest son of the emperor only cared about his wife and not his mother? Mother, didn't you say you wanted to see third Miss Yi? Let's see how Xiaoyao's princess is first. Seeing the Empress Dowager's face was really bad, Mo Jingqi hurriedly said. Yi Li was speechless. Your Majesty, are you trying to divert the trouble away? As expected, the Empress Dowager quickly turned her eyes back to Yi Li. Yi Li silently decided that it was better to believe noble consort Lu's words. Just the Empress Dowager's gaze on her was not something an ordinary person could bear. You are Yi Li? After a long time, the Empress Dowager asked. Yi Li respectfully lowered her eyes and answered, Your Majesty, I am Yi Li. The Empress Dowager frowned and said, Raise your head and let me have a look. Yi Li raised her head and let the Empress Dowager and the Emperor look at her. I have seen your mother several times in the past. The granddaughter of the Su family is really not someone who can't be seen in public. What a pity. The Empress Dowager didn't say anything about what a pity. Of course, no one was tactful enough to ask. Yi Li's sharp eyes saw that noble consort Lu sitting next to the Emperor didn't look good. She had some doubts in her heart. The Empress Dowager shouldn't be scolding noble consort Lu indirectly. After all, the daughter of Prime Minister Lu was definitely not someone who could not be seen in public. My Li is not sensible. Miss Yi, please don't take what happened before to heart. The Empress Dowager's sharp eyes stared at Yi Li without blinking. Chapter 60. Yi Li smiled. Empress Dowager's words are too serious. This subject's daughter and Prince Li are not fated. Compared to not being able to see each other after the wedding, Prince Li bringing it up before the wedding is a good thing for myself and Yi Li. This subject's daughter is very grateful. Oh? What does Miss Yi think about Li's wedding? This is Prince Li's private matter. This subject's daughter should not make wild guesses. What if Jia wants to hear your opinion? The Empress Dowager asked. This subject's daughter thinks that Prince Li was too excited about the wedding and did not rest well the night before. Yi Li smiled innocently and looked at the Empress Dowager with a hint of fear. Prince Li and fourth sister are in love. Who in the capital doesn't know? Finally, he is going to embrace the beauty. It's natural for Prince to be a little excited. Miss Yi, I heard that a few days ago, you said that Prince Li did not pay and asked for a lot of money. Noble consort Lu, who was sitting at the side, suddenly spoke with a smile. The temperature in the hall suddenly dropped. Yi Li blinked blankly, her face full of shame. This subject's daughter is not sensible. Please forgive me, Empress Dowager and Emperor. This subject's daughter, ever since my late mother passed away, I rarely went out. The first time I took charge, I lost my sense of propriety. After that, grandmother also scolded this subject's daughter. This subject's daughter also had people return the money to the princely manor and apologize to Prince. But she was chased out along with the money. After that, Yi Li sent 200 taels to the housekeeper as compensation for the psychological damage. She peacefully kept the rest in her own purse. This was Mo Jingli's fault to begin with. Even the royal family would not have the cheek to blame him. Seeing Yi Li's shocked and ashamed appearance, Mo Jingqi lightly coughed and gave noble consort Lu a warning look. He comforted her. Forget it. This matter was Jingli's fault. It's not Miss Ye's fault. Imperial Mother also does not intend to blame you. Yi Li happily thanked. This subject's daughter thanks your majesty for your magnanimity. The Empress Dowager calmly nodded. Forget it. This Ijia does not intend to blame you. Give Miss Yi a seat. 2 palace maids carried an embroidered stool and placed it behind Yi Li. Yi Li thanked them and then carefully sat on only 2/3 of the stool. She was not grateful to the Empress Dowager for giving her a seat. If she could choose, she would rather continue to stand. After sitting down, not only would the person who was already at the bottom become even shorter, it would also severely affect the person's vision. Moreover, the way a young lady from a noble family sat was even more strenuous than when she was young. At least she could still use her legs to support herself when she was in the horse stance. Sitting in such an elegant and dignified manner was not something that she had been trained to do since she was young. She could only pray that she would not fall off the stool. Miss Yi, is Mr. Qingyun well? Mo Jingqi looked at Yi Li, his eyes filled with curiosity. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, Many thanks for the Emperor's concern. Uncle mentioned that grandfather's body is still quite healthy. Mo Jingqi smiled. There's no need to be so nervous. Back then, we had also witnessed Mr. Qingyun's elegance and couldn't help but yearn for him. It's just that we haven't seen each other for many years. Yi Li lowered her head in shame. Ever since mother passed away, this subject's daughter hasn't seen grandfather for many years. This subject's daughter is truly unworthy of grandfather's love for her not being able to bring joy to mother's knees. Oh? Miss Yi and Prince Ding are getting married. Mr. Qingyun surely won't miss his only granddaughter's wedding. Grandfather is already old and can't bear the fatigue of traveling. I'm afraid he won't be able to see this subject's daughter with his own eyes, but grandfather has already sent eldest uncle to the capital to host the wedding. This subject's daughter is also very happy. Mo Jingqi's eyes flashed slightly. Oh? Mr. Hongyu has already entered the capital? Then. Eldest young master Su. Yi Li smiled calmly and said, Big cousin and a few other cousins have also come to the capital. Uncle doesn't have any scholarly achievements, so there's no need to announce it. Mo Jingqi laughed in a clear voice. The Su family has never liked fame and prefers peace and quiet. However, Mr. Hongyu can be considered my teacher. This time, I didn't even greet him when he entered the capital. It's really a bit impolite. Yi Li hurriedly said she didn't dare, but in her heart, she disagreed. Eldest uncle had only given him some advice on his studies under the late emperor's order. Who was his teacher? Besides, if he really wanted to greet him, he would have done so long ago. She didn't believe that Mo Jingqi really didn't know when eldest uncle entered the capital. Mo Jingqi clearly didn't want to be entangled in this issue. He looked at Yi Li and said, Miss Yi won the first place in this year's 100 Flower Festival. Even Princess Ronghua praised Miss Yi several times in front of the Empress Dowager. I wonder if Miss Yi can let me and the Empress Dowager feast our eyes. he didn't give Yi Li a chance to refuse. With a wave of his hand, palace maids and eunuchs carried over a carved writing table. There were all kinds of brush, ink, paper, and inkstone on the table. This subject's daughter will embarrass herself. Yi Li stood behind the writing table. As she drew, she cursed the emperor 100 times in her heart. She really couldn't understand why these ancient emperors liked to randomly grab people to write poems. After all, not everyone was fond of reciting poems and composing essays, and not everyone had the talent to do so. What if she was called by the emperor but couldn't write a poem? Yi Li drew a picture of an orchid in a well-behaved manner. She also mentioned a poem that her grandfather had written years ago. The only thing that could be called outstanding was her handwriting. Seeing the people's eyes change from curiosity to surprise and then to disappointment, Yi Li didn't care. She respectfully stood behind the writing table and waited for the emperor's evaluation. Orchid? This is Mr. Qingyan's poem. Noble consort Lu frowned and asked. Yi Li said shamefully, this subject's daughter is really not proficient in poetry. Please forgive me, Your Majesty. A bit of disdain flashed through noble consort Lu's eyes. She glanced at the painting and said, Miss Ye's handwriting is pretty good. It was rare for the Empress Dowager to agree with noble consort Lu's words. Yi Li's work from the 100-Flower Festival was in the palace. The painting wasn't amazing, it was just average. As for the poem, the three people in the hall all suspected that the peony poem that stunned the 100-Flower Festival wasn't Yi Li's work. After all, the Su family didn't have many things, but they had many talents. The person who could casually find a ghostwriter for Yi Li was definitely an important person. It wasn't strange for them to have a poem like that. Miss Ye's handwriting is really good. Yi Li could clearly feel that the three people's interest in her had decreased a lot. Even though she didn't understand why the ancient people thought that the four arts represented a person's intelligence, at least this result wasn't bad for her. It wasn't until the afternoon that Yi Li was sent out of the palace by the Empress Dowager. During this time, she contributed her calligraphy to the Empress Dowager to copy a scroll of scriptures. Because no one thought of asking her to go to Yaohua Palace to say goodbye to Yi Jiaoyi, Yi Li didn't want to trouble the people sent by the Empress Dowager. She could only pretend that she had forgotten. Accompanied by the palace servants, she took the gifts from the emperor, the Empress Dowager, and noble consort Lu out of the imperial city. It wasn't until she got into the carriage that Yi Li slowly let out the breath that had been in her heart for most of the day. Miss, rest for a while. You don't look good. Qingyu reached out to feel Yi Li's pulse and said softly. Chapter 61. Qing Luan said helplessly, Miss, it's your first time entering the palace. You're a little nervous. Unfortunately, we can't enter the Empress Dowager's palace, and we can't accompany you. Qingyu smiled and said, you can only scare yourself if you go in. Don't make trouble for Mississippi. Yi Li leaned against the carriage and closed her eyes to rest. At the same time, she went through what happened in the palace today in her mind. When she was in the palace, she could only be careful everywhere. She didn't have time to think about many things. The emperor, the Empress Dowager, noble consort Lu, everyone seemed to be normal, but they seemed to hide some unknown tangled relationship. And Yi Yu, no. Yi Li suddenly opened her eyes. Qing Luan and Qing Yu were startled. Miss, what's wrong? The carriage is going the wrong way. Yi Li said. Before he could finish his words, a long arrow pierced through the carriage with a whoosh. In a remote alley somewhere in the capital, a carriage was parked quietly. The coachman who drove the carriage had already disappeared. Unknowingly, the carriage was surrounded by people. The man in the lead was wearing an inconspicuous gray dress. His long hair covered half of his face. The other half of his face looked stiff and ferocious. His only eye was emitting a bitter cold light. Even if the sun hadn't set yet, it still bloomed a touch of warmth. When it shone on the man, it gave people a kind of bone-chilling coldness. Come out. The man's voice sounded gloomy. For a long time, there was no movement in the carriage. As if waiting impatiently, the man sneered and said, "If you don't come out, I'll shoot the arrow. I know the people inside are not dead. Come out." A moment later, a delicate and pretty girl unsteadily lifted the curtain and slid down from the carriage. Then, together with another delicate and pretty girl, they helped a pale girl with a delicate and pretty face down. There was an arrow stuck in the girl's right shoulder, and the area that was covered by her left hand was already dark red. "You? Who are you?" the one-eyed man sneered. His ferocious eye flashed with a vicious light. "This is the future princess of Prince Ding. That cripple Mo Xiaoyao sure has a good life. He only has half a life left, but there's still such a beautiful woman willing to marry him." Qing Luan stood in front, protecting the two people behind her. "Since you know who we are, how dare you be so rude?" The one-eyed man sneered. "Others might be afraid of Mo Xiaoyao, but I'm not. What's more, is there anyone in the capital who is afraid of him?" Yi Li looked straight at the man. "Do you have a grudge against Prince Ding or the Su family or the Yi family?" The one-eyed man stared blankly for a moment before laughing maniacally. "Mo Xiaoyao's woman? Interesting. I have no enmity with Mo Xiaoyao, the Su family, or the Yi family. What are you going to do about it?" Yi Li said, "So you've taken other people's benefits and now you're looking for trouble? How much did you get?" "I'll double it." "You?" The one-eyed man stared at Yi Li, as if he was evaluating the credibility of her words. "I took 20,000 taels of silver from other people to take your life. Can you afford it?" Yi Li nodded. "If you let us go, I'll give you 40,000 taels. Why should I believe you?" The man's single eye shrank as he fiercely stared at Yi Li. No matter who it was, 40,000 taels of silver was definitely a number that could move people's hearts. The surrounding people's eyes also began to waver, but the one-eyed man didn't say anything, so they didn't dare to act rashly. Yi Li lightly said, "If you don't believe me, you can let my maid go back and give you the money. One hand for the money, and the other hand for the people, so we don't owe each other anything. Moreover, I don't think you want to kill me. I only ask that you don't hurt us." The one-eyed man's eyes fiercely twitched as he stared at Yi Li. "You think that I don't dare to kill you? If you really want to kill me, just shoot us to death with arrows just now." "Good, Mo Xiaoyao's woman is really a bit different. You go back and get the money. If others know about it, or if you don't see the banknotes at the appointed place, then prepare to collect the corpse of your Mississippi." Qing Yu, who was pointed at, shook her head fiercely and said, "I don't want to go. Let Miss go back, we'll stay." The one-eyed man sneered, "Do you think that I will believe that the lives of two girls are valuable?" Qing Yu gritted her teeth and said, "My miss is injured. I know a little about medicine. Let Qing Luan go back. The injury is not serious. If you come quickly, you won't have time to heal your Mississippi get lost. Qing Yu, you go first." Yi Li softly said. Qing Yu bit the corner of her lips and nodded heavily. "Qing Luan, take good care of Mississippi." Qing Luan nodded and turned around to help Qing Yu support Yi Li. Seeing Qing Yu stumbling out, the one-eyed man pointed at the two people beside him and said, "Follow that girl and get the banknotes back. As for you, do you want to go by yourself or do I ask someone to invite you to go?" "We'll go by ourselves. They were kidnapped." Yi Li looked at the situation in front of her helplessly. Of course, a group of bandits could kidnap a future princess from the capital. It had to be said that this was also a very magical thing. Moreover, the group of people moved out of the capital at a very fast speed and came to a steep mountain 100 miles away from the capital. Obviously, they were indeed kidnapped by bandits because this was a bandits' village. Perhaps because Yi Li was still worth 40,000 taels of silver, they were not thrown into the gloomy dungeon, but locked in a somewhat simple hut. When the door was closed, Qing Luan hurriedly walked to the door and listened to the movement outside. Then, she walked to Yi Li and whispered, "Miss, we are so far away from the capital, can Qing Yu find us?" Yi Li put down the hand that had been pressing on her right shoulder and took the arrow off. The arrow entered from the right side of her chest and went in diagonally. It didn't hurt Yi Li at all. The red blood on her clothes was just the red rouge and a bottle of potion that Qing Yu carried with her. He didn't intend to let Qing Yu come back at all. He just didn't want to give up the 40,000 taels of silver. Qing Luan was shocked. "Miss, you mean, they planned to kill us after taking the money?" Yi Li nodded and comforted Qing Luan with a smile. "Don't worry, those two people are not Qing Yu's opponents. She will be fine." The worry on Qing Luan's face didn't disappear at all. She looked at her miss helplessly. She was not worried about Qing Yu. She was worried about how they could get out of danger. Master and eldest young master were comforted by them. Now that Miss was kidnapped by bandits, they could only be helpless. They were really useless. There are too many of them. It's not your fault. Yi Li smiled and said, "Help me bandage my wound." Qing Luan nodded. She lowered her head and pulled a piece of cloth from the sleeve of the clean inner garment to bandage Yi Li's wound. She asked, "Miss, do you know who wants to harm us? Could it be Madam?" Yi Li shook her head and said, "She is short of money recently. It's unlikely that she would take out 20,000 taels of silver to kidnap me. And it's easy to find out." The most important thing was that the other party obviously didn't mean to kill her. Then, either the other party was not afraid of her revenge, or the other party was someone she would never think of, so there was no way to take revenge. Therefore, it should not be Wang Shi. Chapter 62. Qing Luan frowned, but Miss didn't offend anyone. Yi Li was silent. They kidnapped her, but they didn't intend to take her life. Then, once the news of her being kidnapped by bandits spread out, her reputation would be ruined. Marriage. What? Someone doesn't want me and Prince Ding to get married smoothly. Yi Li said faintly. Li Wang. Qing Luan said hatefully. Yi Li shook her head, maybe, but not necessarily. Mo Jingli should know that if something happened to her, the first person Mo Xiaoyao would look for would be him. Then, what should we do now? Qing Luan, open the door and Miss can take the opportunity to escape. Yi Li shook her head. This place was at least 100 li away from the capital. If it was really for her and Prince Ding's marriage as she guessed, then the news of her being kidnapped would have spread out as soon as she left the capital. If she was alone, it might not be difficult to leave this stockade. But even if she went back now, it would be useless. Then, it was better to stay. Maybe there would be some unexpected discoveries. Take a rest first. We'll talk later. Yes, Mississippi, Ding Palace, Prince. The head steward of the palace came in anxiously. Seeing Mo Xiaoyao's face, he didn't have time to salute and hurriedly said, "Prince, something bad happened." Mo Xiaoyao suddenly raised his head. What happened? Just now, the people below came to report that there was a sudden rumor outside, saying that third Miss Yi was kidnapped by flower thieves. The sudden piercing gaze made the head steward's words stop abruptly. The head steward couldn't help but shiver. He looked at the man sitting in the wheelchair with some trepidation. Prince, Mo Xiaoyao closed his eyes and suddenly opened them, asking, "What happened?" This subordinate also doesn't know what happened. When the servants went out to buy things for the prince's wedding, they heard the news being spread all over the place. When he felt that something was wrong, he hurried back to report it to his subordinates. This subordinate does not dare to delay, right now. Mo Xiaoyao raised his hand to interrupt him, saying, "Immediately send someone to the minister's manor to see if Li Li has returned." Another group of people is to immediately investigate Miss Li's whereabouts after she left the palace, as well as the situation in the palace. Yes, I'll go right away. The supervisor didn't dare to stay any longer. He turned around and quickly disappeared into the corridor. Ah Jean, inform Feng San that no matter what method you use, I do not want to hear any more rumors in the capital, Mo Xiaoyao said indifferently in the quiet study, but the murderous intent in his voice made people tremble in fear. Yes. Prince. The steward who had just left appeared at the door. What is it? Eldest young Master Su just sent someone to deliver an invitation, inviting Prince to quickly come to the Su residence for a chat. Mo Xiaoyao lowered his gaze. I understand. Su Residence's residence in the main courtyard, Qing Yu sat powerlessly on a chair. The sleeve of her left arm was torn, and half of her sleeve was dyed red with blood. The two men that the one-eyed man had sent to follow her were unconscious on the ground. Su Hongyu sat at the head of the table with a heavy expression. Below him sat Su Hongyan and Su Qingchen. Su Qingze and the others stood to the side, their expressions unsurprisingly ugly. How are the rumors outside? Su Hongyu asked in a heavy voice. Su Hongyan said, someone deliberately spread it. According to Qingyu, it hasn't even been 2 hours since Li Er was kidnapped, and the rumors have already spread throughout the capital. People have been sent to secretly search all over the capital. But I'm afraid Li Er is no longer in the capital. Su Qingchen said with a frown. The dignified Son of Heaven actually allowed so many people to kidnap 2 weak women. What are the capital's guards doing? Su Qingfeng was furious. Su Qingchen frowned and said, we'll talk about this later. Can't these 2 people wake up? Qing Yu said, this servant has drugged them with agarwood intoxication. They should wake up in 15 minutes. She originally wanted to lure these 2 people back to the Su family, but she didn't expect that one of them would be so alert and see through her plan. In his anger, he wanted to kill her to silence her. She helplessly spent a lot of effort and time to make these 2 people faint. Only then could she inform the eldest young master. But she didn't expect that in such a short time, the news of the young miss being kidnapped would spread throughout the capital. Since you can't wake them up, leave it to I, a faint voice came from the door. Everyone turned to look. Mo Xiaoyao was wearing plain clothes, sitting in a wheelchair with an indifferent expression as he stared at the 2 unconscious people on the ground. Behind him, the silent Jin pushed the wheelchair in. Prince. Everyone stood up. Mo Xiaoyao raised his hand, business is more important. There's no need for formalities. Jin. Yes, Prince. Jin walked forward. With a flick of her right wrist, a thin long whip appeared in her hand. There were small barbs on the tip of the whip, shining coldly under the candlelight. Pa, the long whip viciously lashed at the unconscious body on the ground. With a tearing sound, the barbs on the whip tore off a piece of skin and flesh. While everyone was stunned, Jin mercilessly lashed out with the whip again. Pa, after 5 lashes, a painful groan came from the ground. One of the people was the first to open his eyes. What greeted him was a long whip that was like a poisonous snake. Ah! Pa! Save me! Spare me! Spare me! Ah! Mo Xiaoyao leaned against the wheelchair with an indifferent expression. Tell I, where are the people you kidnapped? No. I don't know. Prince, spare me. Prince, spare me. Pa, it hurts. No, Prince, spare me. I really don't know. I only want to know the whereabouts of the people you kidnapped. Tell me and I will spare your life. Looking down at the person on the ground, Mo Xiaoyao's expression was indifferent. The person under his gaze couldn't help but tremble. He moaned, I really don't know. Mo Xiaoyao nodded, I admire your backbone. I hope your backbone will allow you to live. The wheelchair slowly moved to the side of the person on the ground. That person endured the tearing pain in his body and stared at the person getting closer and closer to him. His eyes flashed with ecstasy. The moment Mo Xiaoyao approached him, he suddenly jumped up and pounced at him. But the person in the wheelchair was clearly faster. The moment the person was about to touch him, he slumped to the ground. Then, Mo Xiaoyao used a strange technique to quickly point at various parts of the person's body. Then, there was a series of bone-chilling kacha-kacha sounds accompanied by an incomparably mournful scream. The person who originally pounced over like a fierce tiger fell beside the wheelchair like a ball of rags. Mo Xiaoyao took the handkerchief Jin handed him and slowly wiped the right hand that had poked the person's body. He looked sideways at the other person on the ground. Now, are you willing to tell I the answer? Chapter 63. Everyone's eyes fell on the ragged body on the ground. It was really a ball of rags. The originally tall and slender man curled up into a ball at an extremely strange angle. It was as if all the bones in his body had disappeared in an instant. He was limp and lifeless on the ground. But what was even more frightening was that this person was still alive. The youngest, Su Qingyan, looked at the scene in front of him and couldn't help but shiver. He hid behind Su Qingfeng without leaving a trace. Now he didn't feel safe following fourth brother. Among the brothers, third brother's martial arts was the best. The person who was still unconscious began to tremble. Spare me. Prince, spare me, where is the person you kidnapped? Mo Xiaoyao asked. Not in the capital. Boss left the capital as soon as he caught the person. Where did he go? Woo. I really don't know. Boss said our stronghold was not safe, so he changed the place after doing the last job. I haven't been there. A tall man was so scared that he cried bitterly. Then tell me where you were. Outside the capital. 60 Li Black Cloud Peak. Woo. Prince, spare me. Give them to Feng San and see if he can get anything out of them. Go and prepare immediately. I want to leave the city. Yes. Jean put away the whip and walked out with one person in each hand. The young man's slender and thin body didn't feel the slightest strain carrying two strong men twice his size. He walked out as if he was flying. In a simple room, Yi Li and Qing Luan were lying on the bed and sitting on a stool beside the bed with their eyes closed. Although her eyes were closed, Qing Luan's face still had a look of shame and uneasiness. She secretly opened her eyes and glanced at Yi Li, who was sitting on the bed and leaning against the wall. Qing Luan whispered, Miss, lie down and rest for a while. Qing Luan will guard. Yi Li opened her eyes and looked at her. She smiled and said, rest for an hour. Tonight, you must find a way to leave here. Qing Luan suddenly widened her eyes in surprise. How can that be? Miss should be the one to leave first. Qing Luan knows that young Miss is not a weak woman without the strength to truss a chicken. Qing Luan will lead those people away for young Mississippi. Young Miss will definitely be able to break out by herself. Yi Li shook her head and said, I will be fine even if you go out. If I don't see you, they will definitely kill you. That won't do. I can't leave Miss alone. Qing Luan said stubbornly. Yi Li looked at her firmly. When you go back, you can find someone to save me. Looking at their fearless look, I'm afraid it's not easy to find the place where we are now. Qing Luan's mind was in a mess, and she looked at Yi Li hesitantly. It seemed that listening to Mrs. orders was the right choice, but for some reason, she felt uneasy. Yi Li smiled and said, Don't worry, I'm the miss, aren't I? Big brother asked all of you to listen to me. Are you going to disobey my orders? Miss. Qing Luan was at a loss and could only look at Yi Li with tears in her eyes. Yi Li looked at her and said softly, Qing Luan, be good. You must leave here tonight. Perhaps, after that, I will meet some unexpected people. Miss. Qing Luan looked at Yi Li in horror. Be good, don't be afraid. Miss, I can get myself out of this. Hurry up and go down the mountain to ask for help. You also want us to go home earlier, don't you? Yi Li smiled and fooled her. Qing Luan finally nodded solemnly. Bang! The door of the room was kicked open from the outside. Qing Luan quickly jumped up from the bed and stood in front of Yi Li, staring vigilantly at the two burly men who suddenly broke in. What do you want to do? The first person stared at Yi Li, who was protected behind Qing Luan, with a lustful look, and laughed. Is this the third miss of the Yi family? The most talented woman in the capital this year, Prince Ding's fiancée? The one who followed him was obviously a lackey. He smiled and said, Second bandit chief is right. This is the miss brought back by the head bandit chief. The second bandit chief rubbed his hands and laughed evilly. Big brother, what do you mean? Why are these two beautiful women locked up here? The lackey was stunned and remembered what his boss told him. He quickly said, "Second bandit chief, you can't touch these two beauties." The second bandit chief snorted and said, "Who can't I touch in my ghost cloud mountain? This miss is worth a total of 60,000 taels of silver. The head bandit chief told us, especially Miss Yi, that we can't touch her." 60,000 taels of silver? The second bandit chief's eyes lit up with greed. His gaze fell on Yi Li and then returned to Qing Yuan. He smiled and said, "Well, for the sake of 60,000 taels of silver, I will let her go first. Then this girl belongs to this fort master. Although she is not as beautiful as that one, she is much better than those ugly people in the village." As he said, he pounced on Qing Yuan. "Qing Yuan, do it." Yi Li suddenly got up and quickly bypassed Qing Yuan and the second bandit chief who pounced on her. She directly knocked out the lackey standing behind. Qing Yuan did not delay. Her seemingly petite body seemed to have infinite strength. She punched the man's abdomen, then nimbly turned over and landed behind him. She raised her hand and chopped the back of his neck. The tall and strong man immediately fell to the ground. He did not even make a sound. Yi Li had quickly closed the door behind her. Mississippi. Yi Li nodded with appreciation. The little girl had good potential. "Okay, don't delay. Do you remember the way down the mountain?" Qing Yuan roughly recalled and nodded. When they went up the mountain, although the bandits covered their eyes, they ignored that Qing Yuan was a martial artist and her hearing was extraordinary. Although she could not completely remember, she should still remember the general direction. Yi Li said, "I guess this village is newly built. Whether it's the mechanism or the defense, it won't be too strong. You should be careful. Let's go." "Miss, be careful." Yi Li nodded and repeatedly assured him that she would be safe. After sending Qing Yuan away, she looked back at the two people who were still lying on the ground. She bent over and took out the hairpin on her head and pierced some inconspicuous acupoints on their bodies a few times. Only then did he sit back on the bed and close his eyes to rest. Yi Li sat quietly on the bed, but her ears were focused on listening to the movements outside. The village was quiet at night. Apparently, Qing Yuan was not discovered by anyone. Yi Li heaved a sigh of relief. Someone who could successfully follow Mr. Feng Yu should be trustworthy, right? As long as they were not discovered within an hour was enough for Qing Yuan to leave this kind of ghost cloud or returning cloud mountain. Bang! The simple door was kicked open from the outside again, and the door began to sway with difficulty due to the unbearable weight. The one-eyed man rushed in first. When he saw the people on the ground and Yi Li sitting peacefully on the bed, he was stunned. Unexpectedly, he didn't get angry. Instead, he waved his hand and called for a few people to carry the people on the ground out. Chapter 64. It seems that I still underestimated you. Where's that girl? The one-eyed man stared at Yi Li and asked. Yi Li sighed helplessly in her heart. She was discovered in advance. She hoped that Qing Yuan could go down the mountain safely. Didn't you see it? She escaped. The ferocious one-eyed man squinted suspiciously and stared at her. Why didn't you go with her? Or did that girl betray her master and escape? It's amazing that a little girl could escape from the stockade without anyone noticing. Yi Li looked at him and said, "A group of bandits actually managed to kidnap two people right under the emperor's nose. I'm also very surprised." The one-eyed man snorted and said, "The people I sent to follow your girl to get money haven't come back yet. What do you think happened to them?" Yi Li shook her head and pretended to be at a loss. "It seems that your girl is a master. Maybe she has gone down the mountain to find reinforcements now. What do you think you need to do to save your life before the reinforcements come?" The one-eyed man stared at the indifferent girl in front of him viciously. Yi Li raised her hand and touched her carefully bandaged shoulder helplessly. She said, "Maybe you can consider taking a sum of money from me and then go away." I think your two men didn't come back because they want to do something to my girl. Since you know that my girl is a master, you should also think that the other one won't be too bad. So, our deal can actually continue. It seems that Miss Yi likes to solve problems with money. The one-eyed man sneered. Yi Li shook her head. Didn't you take someone else's money to make things difficult for me? Since the other party didn't want to buy my life, then I think your purpose has been achieved. I believe that before tomorrow, the whole capital will spread the rumor that third Miss Yi was kidnapped by bandits. And I just spend some money so that I won't suffer any real harm, and you won't violate the deal with the other party. Why not kill two birds with one stone? It sounds very reasonable. Someone told me that problems that can be solved with money are not problems. This time I won't renege on the debt. I'll give you the money as soon as I'm free. I can even pay the deposit first. Yi Li smiled. What if I don't agree? The one-eyed man narrowed his eyes. Yi Li said indifferently, if I die, the Yi family and Su family will definitely do their best to encircle and annihilate you. If I was still alive, I would consider using all of my assets, including the Su family's dowry and the betrothal gifts of Ding Guangfu as a bounty. I would offer a bounty all over the world to kill you. I won't take your life. As long as I can see your blade once, I will give you 1,000 taels. How many people do you think will accept it? The one-eyed man's mouth twitched. Very vicious. The premise is that you can find me. Yi Li's smile widened. Someone in the Tianyi pavilion owes me a life. The mocking smile on the one-eyed man's face finally froze completely. The viciousness in his single eye gradually dissipated and was replaced by a sharp edge. Although he still had that terrifying face, in an instant, he gave off the aura of a superior. You are indeed Mo Xiaoyao's woman. You are indeed extraordinary. Yi Li smiled bitterly. It's just to save my life. Perhaps you are willing to show your true face. To be honest, I don't like to talk to people who wear masks. The one-eyed man stared at her in surprise. You can tell. I thought my disguise technique was good enough to pass off as the real thing. Yi Li said, I'm probably more sensitive to these things. I think there is still a difference between a human skin mask and a real face, isn't there? The one-eyed man rubbed his face in disgust. Time is too tight. It's a defective product that was made in a hurry. Since you know someone wants to ruin your reputation, do you know what the other party wants? Yi Li looked at him. I'd like to hear the details. The one-eyed man walked to the side and sat down. He stared at Yi Li with a teasing gaze. The other party wants to ruin your reputation. Pay attention, they really want to ruin you. Yi Li's eyes turned cold. It's a woman. The one-eyed man raised his eyebrows in surprise. Yi Li frowned. Only women like to use such a vicious method to deal with other women. The one-eyed man shrugged. I definitely won't tell you who the other party is. Aren't you afraid? Yi Li looked at him seriously. She thought for a bit and said, You don't plan on doing that, right? The man nodded and laughed. I have to admit, Mo Xiaoyao really does have a good eye. At least he's much better than that idiot Mo Jingli. I really don't plan on doing that. After all, I don't plan on angering Mo Xiaoyao for a few thousand taels of silver. You know Mo Xiaoyao. Yi Li pointed out. The one-eyed man didn't deny it. He stood up and said, We can leave now. Third Miss Yi, let's go get the money I deserve and then send you home. What do you think? I estimate that in another 2 to 4 hours, Mo Xiaoyao should be here. It's not safe here. Yi Li indifferently followed him and stood up. She asked, What about the people in your stronghold? The one-eyed man turned around and gave her a twisted smile. You don't really think that I'm a bandit leader, do you? Don't worry, even though I'm not a bandit leader, but the people in this stronghold are all bandits who do all kinds of evil. They're just unlucky to be caught in Mo Xiaoyao's hands. The original one-eyed leader wasn't killed by you, right? Yi Li followed the man through the crude houses. Along the way, the bandits who passed by on patrol bowed to the one-eyed man. When they saw Yili following behind him, they all revealed a wretched smile. The guards here really aren't that good. No wonder Qing Luan didn't alert the people in the stronghold at all. You actually know about this? They really aren't that good. If it wasn't for my help, these idiots wouldn't have been able to leave the capital and would have been caught. The one-eyed man replied, that greedy guy is sleeping soundly in his room. He actually wants to monopolize all the bounty. I've always been the one to make money, leaving others with no money to earn. When Imo Xiaoyao comes, I'll use him as a scapegoat. What do you think of this idea? Yili nodded indifferently. She looked at the road in front of her that was getting more and more remote. We're leaving from here. The man nodded. Don't worry, as long as I get the money, I'll definitely send you back to the Yi family unscathed. Just as he was about to raise his hand to fiddle with the mechanism, a strange sound came from the foot of the mountain. Yili didn't make a sound, but the one-eyed man's expression immediately changed. He cursed in a low voice, "Damn it! How could he come so fast?" After saying this, he immediately gave up the original road and pulled Yili in another direction. We're not going to take the secret passage. The man said, it's not safe to take the secret passage, and it's too circuitous. Maybe we'll be caught in the middle. Listening to the sound that was gradually getting closer, there was still no movement in the stronghold. It was obvious that the people who came were all experts. The mob in the stronghold didn't even find a trace of them. The man pulled Yili towards the back of the mountain. There's another road in the back of the mountain. Although it's a bit dangerous, it leads directly to a valley. Imo Xiaoyao definitely won't be able to find it in a short time. Chapter 65. But Yili said. Relax, my Qinggong is not bad. I can still go down with you. But I want to renege on my debt. Yili said with a smile. A crescent moon hung in the sky, not too far away, not too close. A cool breeze blew from the top of the mountain. The one-eyed man lying on the cliff had a regretful and bitter smile on his face. Miss Yi, isn't this method too despicable? Yili leisurely sat by his side. She casually pulled off the cloth on her shoulder that was dyed red with rouge and threw it down the cliff. She indifferently shrugged and said, You're not a gentleman, I won't feel guilty. The method was not important, the result was the most important. Don't move. The thin and sharp blade was pressed against the man's pulse on his neck. I don't recommend you to act rashly before you have absolute confidence in your ability to do so. If I stab forward half an inch, even a golden immortal won't be able to save you. It's a very special poison. Can I ask what kind of strange poison you used to deal with your savior? The man helplessly gave up on the idea of using his internal energy to temporarily stop the poison. In fact, he could not use any internal energy right now. Yili shook her head, it's a secret. But the title of savior is still up for debate. Speaking of which, I've been in a very bad mood recently. It's an honor to hear the number one talented woman in the capital complain. The man said with a smile. But when paired with his frightening appearance, it seemed a bit funny. Yili frowned and said, Ever since Prince Ding and I were arranged to be married, it seems like all kinds of trouble have come knocking on our door. Constantly probing, spying, looking for trouble, and of course kidnapping. Since it's so troublesome, why don't you elope with me? What do you think? Yili's long eyelashes gently fluttered. I'm not interested in the play between the talented man and the beautiful woman. Moreover, I'm guessing that the play must have forgotten to tell the beautiful woman what to do with her parents, relatives, sisters, and reputation. What are we going to rely on to survive? What if you elope with another beauty? The man looked at her in disappointment. After a while, he said, You think too much. Didn't the drama say that the gifted scholar would definitely become the top scholar in the future? She would be rich and her parents would forgive her relatives would envy her, and her sisters would be jealous of her. Most importantly, in the end, the gifted scholar and the beautiful woman will definitely live happily ever after, right? Yili shook her head. In the movie, it only says that this is the end of the drama. Most people imagine that they will grow old together and be in love forever, okay? The man thought about it carefully. There really didn't seem to be any dramas or storybooks where the couple grew old together and had many children and grandchildren. Very well, my lady. What will it take for you to let me go? The man seemed to understand that it was useless to beat around the bush with Yili, so he asked directly. Tell me who wants to harm me. Yili didn't beat around the bush and asked straightforwardly. What will happen if I don't say anything? The cold blade gently slid across his neck and small bumps appeared on the skin on his neck. Don't worry, I won't stab you with a knife. I will directly push you down. Yili looked down at the bottomless valley and smiled. Why don't you just stab me with a knife? The man didn't know whether to laugh or cry. No, I really can't say that. You can say that. I promised someone else. A man's words carry enormous weight. Even if you stab me to death, I won't say anything. The man said firmly. Yili looked at him for a while and raised her eyebrows. All right. Since it's like this, then let me see what kind of face is hidden under this mask. Miss Yi, how about you let me go now and I owe you a favor? The man tried to negotiate. This sounds a bit familiar. However, do you think that I would trust someone whose identity I don't even know? Even if you owe me 100 favors, I won't be able to find you. Yili held the dagger in one hand and pointed it at the man's neck. Her other hand began to search that twisted and ugly face. Miss Yi, I have 20,000 silver taels on me. Take it and treat it as a way to get over your shock. How about we write off today's matter? Yili's hand did not stop as she lightly said, do you think that I'm like you, willing to risk my life for money? If we write it off this time, how would I know if there won't be a next time? The man was silent for a moment before saying, I don't know if there will be a next time, but I can guarantee that I won't make things difficult for Miss Yi. How about it? Feeling Yili's hand paused for a moment, the man quickly added, I promise that I will never make things difficult for Miss Yi again. You can tell this to Mo Xiaoyao. He knows who I am and knows if my words can be trusted. The cold blade on his neck finally left a bit. Yili stood up, I'll trust you for now. The antidote. No, the antidote was given to me by Qin Yu. Although you can't use your internal strength, it shouldn't be a problem if you don't use your Qinggong. Yili said with a faint smile. The man clenched his teeth, but the sound of footsteps not far away made him unable to argue with Yili. He could only stand up and prepare to use a method he had never used before to climb down the valley. But unfortunately, he was a step too slow. A cold voice came from the other side of the path. Han Mingyue, a plain-clothed man sitting in a wheelchair, slowly appeared at the end of the path. Behind him was the silent brown-clothed youth who was steadily pushing the wheelchair. Even on this uneven mountain peak, he didn't seem to be struggling at all. Sitting in the wheelchair, Mo Xiaoyao's face was as calm as water. He stared at the one-eyed man with a cold and deep gaze. With just a glance, the one-eyed man felt his body stiffen as if he was frozen in ice. He could only bitterly smile as he looked at the cliff less than 2 steps away from him. Li, are you all right? Mo Xiaoyao looked at Yili with a warm gaze. Yili calmly put away her dagger under his gaze. She walked in front of him and said with an apologetic smile, Sorry, I made you worry. Mo Xiaoyao's eyes flashed and his brows furrowed. In the end, he sighed softly and said, You're tired. Let's talk when we get back. Yili also felt that the current environment wasn't suitable for talking. She nodded in agreement with Mo Xiaoyao's suggestion. One of the women following behind Mo Xiaoyao and Jean gave a cloak to Yili. Yili faintly smiled. Even though she felt that it wasn't too cold, she still put on the cloak. Han Mingyue, can you tell me why you're here? Mo Xiaoyao asked as he stared sharply at the man on the cliff. You can recognize me even like this? The man sighed. He reached out and searched his face for a while. Then, he pulled off a leather mask, revealing his originally handsome but dejected face. When she heard Imo Xiaoyao mention the name Han Mingyue, Yili only raised her eyebrows. When the man took off his mask and saw his handsome face, she wasn't too surprised. This face was at least 80% similar to that Sir Feng Yu from a while ago. However, that face was easily seductive and frivolous, while this face was much more decent. The same raised eyebrows and smiling expression gave off a carefree and unrestrained feeling. Chapter 66. Xiaoyao, we haven't seen each other in so many years. I didn't expect to see you again under such circumstances. It's really a pity. Even though the handsome man was dressed in the rough clothes of a bandit, he still gave off the impression of a distinguished and elegant young master. However, the slightly fawning expression on his face made people feel slightly uncomfortable. You must have said that I would come all the way here to congratulate you on your wedding. It seems like you still don't welcome old friends. Your congratulations are to kidnap my fiancé. Imo Xiaoyao's voice was deep and pleasant. Yi Li, who was standing behind him, unconsciously pulled her cloak closer. It's a misunderstanding. Han Mingyue said helplessly with a bitter expression, I didn't know that the person I was going to kidnap was your fiancé. However, I've already accepted the deal. If I can't complete it, how can I, Han Mingyue, keep my reputation and face? I've already tried my best to minimize the loss. Now, I've completed the deal and your fiancé is safe and sound. Moreover, I've been tricked by her. I'm the one who's losing out, okay? Who paid for it? Imo Xiaoyao stared at her and asked. I can't say. Han Mingyue smiled bitterly. Imo Xiaoyao sneered, Han Mingyue, as long as there's money, is there anything you don't dare to sell other than your brother? Han Mingyue sighed. The expression on her face became even more bitter. She looked at Imo Xiaoyao and said, there's always one or two things that I can't sell no matter what. Moreover, Mingxi was dealt with badly by you this time. Xiaoyao, for my sake, can you not pursue the matter this time? I promise there won't be a next time. Imo Xiaoyao's expression darkened. Han Mingyue stomped her feet and said, we'll send 10% of the Tianyi Pavilion's profits this year to my sister-in-law. Han Mingyue, you're too nervous. Imo Xiaoyao raised his hand and touched the mask on his face. Han Mingyue froze, and a trace of annoyance flashed across her face. How could he forget that Imo Xiaoyao knew him too well? If he didn't appear so nervous, it would be difficult for Imo Xiaoyao to determine his target. Xiaoyao, I'm begging you. After looking deeply at Han Mingyue's pleading face for a while, Imo Xiaoyao spat out these two words, scram. In the face of such rude treatment, Han Mingyue's face was filled with joy. I will definitely send an apology gift to sister-in-law's residence within 3 days. Imo Xiaoyao's reply was to raise his hand slightly, Black Cloud Cavalry, fire. The people who were originally standing around in a semicircle, wrapped in black clothes and wearing black headscarves, had unknowingly grabbed their bows and arrows. Draw the bow and release the arrow, Han Mingyue could only helplessly fall down the cliff. Imo Xiaoyao, you're ruthless. Han Mingyue's pitiful cries disappeared from the cliff. Yi Li blinked and lowered her head to look at Imo Xiaoyao. She wasn't sure if Han Mingyue was still hiding his strength. At the very least, even if she was in her best condition, there was no way she would be fine after falling down from here. As if he knew her doubts, Imo Xiaoyao explained, Han Mingyue likes to leave a backup plan behind. He definitely has some arrangements below. He won't die from the fall. Yi Li frowned. So her threat to throw him down was not a threat at all. As expected, it was easy to make mistakes if you didn't understand your enemy. Know yourself and know your enemy, and you won't be defeated in 100 battles. The war saint didn't lie to me. Let's go back. Imo Xiaoyao reached out his hand and said softly. Okay. In the other courtyard of the Su Fu, she finally managed to get rid of her 2 uncles and 5 cousins with great difficulty. On one hand, Yi Li felt that dealing with so many people at the same time was a bit of a headache. At the same time, she could feel the uncontrollable warmth and joy of being cared for by her family. Mo Xiaoyao sat to the side and silently looked at the young girl sitting across from him. He suddenly found that he didn't understand his fiancée at all. In reality, his fiancée wasn't even 16 yet, but she was unexpectedly strong, decisive and mature. What was he doing when he was 15 or 16? Mo Xiaoyao rarely thought about the past, but looking at the young girl's faint smile in front of him, he felt that it wasn't that painful to think about the past. When he was 15 or 16, he was in the prime of his youth. Riding a horse in the capital, he was frivolous and wanton. Who in the world didn't know that the young master of the Ding King's household was a young hero? Who in the world didn't know that the young general of the Ding King's household had swept through the southern border like a god at a young age? Even on the bloody battlefield, he was still in high spirits, his words and actions unrestrained. But when this young girl was 15 years old, she had already experienced things that most girls would never experience in their lifetime. Losing her mother at a young age, breaking off the engagement, being schemed against by her stepmother, a dismal reputation, a marriage that everyone was afraid of, being plotted against, being kidnapped. But he had never seen her panicked appearance before. Even after encountering this kind of situation today, she didn't cry or get angry after escaping danger. She even smiled and said sorry to him for making him worry. If he was in her position, he definitely wouldn't be able to be this calm at her age. Mo Xiaoyao sighed in his heart. Li, I'm very sorry about today's matter. After a long time, Mo Xiaoyao said in a soft voice. Yi Li looked up at him and smiled, this isn't something you can control. I was too careless. But, tomorrow in the capital, I'm afraid it will affect the Ding King's household's reputation. Mo Xiaoyao looked at her, his eyes deep and unfathomable. I have the final say in the Ding King's household, as long as you don't regret it. Yi Li blinked and instantly understood what he meant. He had the final say in the Ding King's household, so no matter what her reputation became, it wouldn't affect their marriage. Was it like this? Tilting her head to think, Yi Li helplessly smiled and said, I think if I regret it, I probably won't be able to get married in this lifetime. Then how about, we make do? Mo Xiaoyao's lips curled into a hard-to-see curve, that's for the best. I also feel that if you regret it, it won't be easy for me to find a suitable princess in this lifetime. Yi Li looked at him with a smile and said, since the prince doesn't mind, then let's make do. Seeing the young girl sitting in front of the window turn around and smile at him, saying let's make do, Mo Xiaoyao suddenly felt his heart sway. Under the candlelight, the young girl's slightly pale face seemed to glow faintly, making one's heart skip a beat. Mo Xiaoyao quickly moved away and supported his forehead with his hand, saying, Han Mingyue will probably send you something in the next 2 days. Don't worry about him, just accept it. Yi Li said in surprise, will he really give me 10% of the Tianyi Pavilion's income? The Tianyi Pavilion was the largest intelligence organization in Dechu State. Even 10% of the income from selling all kinds of information every year was absolutely shocking. Mo Xiaoyao nodded and looked at Yi Li, wanting to say something, but hesitated. Yi Li said with a smile, there's no need to talk about today's matter. Since you've already agreed to Han Mingyue. Although I'm not sure how powerful the Tianyi Pavilion and the Wind and Moon Pavilion are, I don't really want to be enemies with him. However, this is the only time. If that person makes any moves in the future and falls into my hands, I won't accept his pleading. Of course. After a moment of silence, Mo Xiaoyao looked seriously at Yi Li and promised, since Miss Li doesn't regret it, then you and I are family in the future. Anyone who wants to hurt Miss Li is my enemy. Chapter 67. Yi Li nodded with a smile and did not say anything. The crescent moon outside the window gradually set behind the roof. The young girl raised her head to look at the waning moon in the sky. Her beautiful face was bathed in a layer of quiet light by the moonlight. Behind her, the young man in the wheelchair focused on the young girl's slender figure. His gentle gaze was filled with an inexplicable light. In a secret base of the Tianyi Pavilion in the capital, Han Mingyue fell into the room in a sorry state, startling the people in the room. Brother, what happened to you? Young Master Feng Yu, who made countless parents want to skin him alive and countless young girls fall head over heels for him, was stunned for a moment. He hurriedly rushed over to catch his brother's tottering body. Han Mingyue waved his hand and allowed his brother to help him sit down on a soft couch. He smiled bitterly and said, "I've offended the devil." Although he was used to being fully prepared, when he jumped off the cliff, no matter how careful he was, he still suffered internal and external injuries from the impact of the protruding branches. Regarding this, he didn't have any resentment in his heart. Everyone knew that Imo Xiaoyao had indeed shown mercy. Otherwise, no one in the Black Cloud Cavalry would have missed a person who had lost all his internal energy with their archery skills. Brother, you've seen third young Mistress Yi? Han Mingxi asked in surprise as he felt Han Mingyue's pulse. Han Mingyue forced himself to sit up. He looked at his brother and narrowed his eyes. How did you know? You offended Imo Xiaoyao in the capital this time. Don't tell me it's because of this young Mistress Yi. Han Mingxi rubbed his nose awkwardly and tried to smile apologetically. Brother, I also fell into Yi Li's hands last time because of the same medicine. I owe her a favor. Can you not cause trouble for her? Han Mingyue sneered. You think the Tianyi Pavilion owes her a favor? Han Mingxi lowered his head in shame and counted with his fingers. That woman is very smart. I didn't say anything, but she already guessed the relationship between the Tianyi Pavilion and the Wind and Moon Inn. She took my jade pendant. I can't do anything about it. That's my jade pendant. Hand it over. Who knows what kind of trouble it will cause if it's on you. Han Mingyue stretched out her hand. Han Mingxi did not dare to disobey and obediently handed over the jade pendant. Anyway, he had no interest in the Wind and Moon Pavilion or the Tianyi Pavilion. He only took his brother's jade pendant for fun. Brother, are you seriously injured? I'll call the doctor. Seeing her usually frivolous brother's face filled with worry, Han Mingyue's expression softened a little. She said softly, "It's nothing serious. It's just that I can't use my internal energy. There's no need to call a doctor. Are there any guests?" Han Mingxi's face sank. She wasn't sure if Han Mingyue was still hiding his strength. At the very least, even if she was in her best condition, there was no way she would be fine after falling down from here. As if he knew her doubts, Imo Xiaoyao explained, Han Mingyue likes to leave a backup plan behind. He definitely has some arrangements below. He won't die from the fall. Yi Li frowned. So her threat to throw him down was not a threat at all. As expected, it was easy to make mistakes if you didn't understand your enemy. Know yourself and know your enemy, and you won't be defeated in 100 battles. The war saint didn't lie to me. Let's go back. Imo Xiaoyao reached out his hand and said softly. Okay. In the other courtyard of the Su Fu, she finally managed to get rid of her 2 uncles and 5 cousins with great difficulty. On one hand, Yi Li felt that dealing with so many people at the same time was a bit of a headache. At the same time, she could feel the uncontrollable warmth and joy of being cared for by her family. Imo Xiaoyao sat to the side and silently looked at the young girl sitting across from him. He suddenly found that he didn't understand his fiancée at all. In reality, his fiancée wasn't even 16 yet, but she was unexpectedly strong, decisive and mature. What was he doing when he was 15 or 16? Imo Xiaoyao rarely thought about the past, but looking at the young girl's faint smile in front of him, he felt that it wasn't that painful to think about the past. When he was 15 or 16, he was in the prime of his youth. Riding a horse in the capital, he was frivolous and wanton. Who in the world didn't know that the young master of the Ding King's household was a young hero? Who in the world didn't know that the young general of the Ding King's household had swept through the southern border like a god at a young age? Even on the bloody battlefield, he was still in high spirits, his words and actions unrestrained. But when this young girl was 15 years old, she had already experienced things that most girls would never experience in their lifetime. Losing her mother at a young age, breaking off the engagement, being schemed against by her stepmother, a dismal reputation, a marriage that everyone was afraid of, being plotted against, being kidnapped. But he had never seen her panicked appearance before. Even after encountering this kind of situation today, she didn't cry or get angry after escaping danger. She even smiled and said sorry to him for making him worry. If he was in her position, he definitely wouldn't be able to be this calm at her age. Mo Xiaoyao sighed in his heart. Li, I'm very sorry about today's matter. After a long time, Mo Xiaoyao said in a soft voice. Yi Li looked up at him and smiled. This isn't something you can control. I was too careless. But, tomorrow in the capital, I'm afraid it will affect the Ding King's household's reputation. I let you, the head of the Tianyi Pavilion, the most handsome man in Jiangnan, do it personally. It's a gift to her. Why didn't you do it? The woman said unhappily. Enough. Han Mingyue said coldly, why didn't you ask me how I was injured and how I was injured? Do you think that if I really did something to Yi Li, I would be able to come back alive tonight? The woman's breath stopped. She seemed to have noticed her loss of composure. She looked at him apologetically and said softly, why did you go alone? If you brought more people, even if Mo Xiaoyao brought the Black Cloud Cavalry, they might not be able to hurt you. With the current situation, it's impossible for him to mobilize a large number of Black Cloud Cavalry. Han Mingyue's cold expression softened as the woman's soft voice softened. He said indifferently, because I can't drag the Tianyi Pavilion down with me. This is a private matter between you and me. Naturally, I'll deal with it myself. You should take care of yourself. In the future, don't come looking for me regarding Yi Li's matters. I won't help you anymore. Why? Because next time, Xiaoyao will definitely kill me. I'm a businesswoman. I've never wanted to challenge the Mo family's bottom line. You should go. Be careful. After speaking, Han Mingyue leaned against the soft couch and closed his eyes. He no longer paid any attention to the woman in black at the door. The woman in black clearly still had something to say. However, when she saw the ashen-faced man lying on the soft couch with rejection written all over his body, she could only swallow the words she wanted to say. She snorted softly and said, then rest well. I'll go back first. She turned and walked out the door. Not far from the door, a man who resembled Han Mingyue stared at her with gloomy eyes. You don't have to come again. We're going back to Jiangnan soon. The woman in black turned to the side. Her charming eyes lifted slightly with a hint of disdain. If you have time, go pick a few more flowers. Don't meddle in other people's business. I don't want Mingyue to tell me that she's missing a younger brother. Han Mingxi's expression darkened. He sneered and said, just as well. I'll see what kind of person has captivated my brother. Not many people knew how good Sir Feng Yu's martial arts were. However, his qinggong was definitely not something that could be bragged about. The man who was originally standing under the tree only lightly fluttered his sleeves. In an instant, he disappeared from under the tree. In the blink of an eye, he was already standing beside the woman in black. He reached out to pull the black veil on her face. Impudent.